Obsidian Captive. Victoria Cross, a brilliant cybersecurity expert, accidentally hacks into encrypted files belonging to the most powerful crime syndicate in Obsidian City. Now every killer in the city wants her dead, but ruthless enforcer Dante Romano finds her first. Instead of eliminating the witness, Dante makes an unexpected move. He takes Victoria captive in his penthouse prison. She becomes the prisoner of a beautiful psychopath who threatens her life by day, yet can't resist her defiance by night. Victoria despises her captor, but his touch ignites a fire she can't control. Dante loathes his own weakness, yet refuses to release the only woman brave enough to challenge him. When rival families discover Victoria's existence, a bloody war erupts across the city. Now survival means trusting the monster who destroyed her world. He owns her body. She owns his soul. But in this deadly game, only one can survive with their heart intact. Chapter 1: The Unauthorized Intrusion. The hum of servers was Victoria Cross's lullaby, the soft glow of multiple monitors her constellation. Her apartment, a carefully curated ecosystem of high-performance computing rigs, ergonomic furniture, and empty coffee mugs, was her sanctuary, her fortress against the analog world. Tonight, the fortress was under siege, but the enemy wasn't at her gates. It was deep inside the digital wires, an invisible predator she was unknowingly cornering. Victoria leaned closer to the main display, pushing her glasses up the bridge of her nose with a smudge-stained finger. Lines of code flowed faster than rain on glass, a symphony of intricate sequences she was attempting to dissect. For weeks, she'd been chipping away at this particular encryption, a rumored ghost in the machine, whispered about in hushed online forums as the digital equivalent of Fort Knox. It wasn't for a client, not for money. It was the challenge, pure and exhilarating. A puzzle too complex, too perfectly shielded not to demand her attention. The barrier had been formidable, layered with protocols she'd never encountered, shifting and adapting in real time like a living organism. Hours bled into minutes, consciousness narrowed to the task at hand, the world outside the glowing screen ceasing to exist. Her fingers danced across the keyboard, a blur of muscle memory and instinct, testing, prodding, exploiting the tiniest fissures in the digital armor. Then, a flicker. A moment of digital hesitation in the target system's response. She froze, breath held tight in her chest. Had she? No, couldn't be. She ran the sequence again, a slightly altered payload designed to probe the suspected vulnerability. This time, the hesitation was longer. And then, the wall didn't just crack. It crumbled. Access granted. A cascade of directories flooded her screen. Not the innocuous files she'd expected from a seemingly random, oversecured server address she'd stumbled upon in a dark corner of the web. These were labeled with cryptic codes, internal project names, and dates. Curiosity, a professional hazard she'd never managed to curb, surged. She navigated deeper, her fingers working on autopilot, driven by an insatiable need to see what lay beneath such intense protection. The first file she opened wasn't just sensitive, it was horrifying. Financial ledgers detailed sums that made her stomach clench. Names followed by addresses and chillingly brief notes like resolved, relocated, or silenced. Operational plans for territories within the Obsidian City, grids overlaid with targets and timelines. Communications logs, encrypted with a secondary layer she'd now bypassed, revealing terse, brutal directives. She didn't understand it all, not yet. The sheer volume was overwhelming. But key phrases, recurring names, Thorn Family asterisk, asterisk Apex Tower asterisk, Morty Territory, began to assemble themselves into a terrifying picture. This wasn't just a private server. This was the backbone of a sprawling, ruthless organization, the Thorn Family Syndicate, and she hadn't just peeked behind the curtain, she'd ripped it down. A cold dread, heavy and suffocating, began to seep into her bones, pushing out the adrenaline. This wasn't a game anymore. This was real, and it was deadly. She'd breached the labyrinth, the mythical, impenetrable data vault she'd heard whispers of, dismissed as hyperbole. It was real, and she was inside. Panic, sharp and sudden, snapped her out of her stunned state. She had to undo this. Delete everything. Wipe logs. Sever the connection, not just gracefully, but violently. Erase any trace she had ever been here. Her fingers, moments ago dancing with precision, now fumbled slightly as she opened a fresh terminal window, commands flying across the screen. System logs, erase. Temporary files, shred. Connection history, purge. Root access, lock down. But even as the deletion processes began, a new wave of code appeared on a monitoring screen. It wasn't her code. It was alien, aggressive, and moving with impossible speed. They knew, or rather their systems did. Automated defenses, roused from slumber by her intrusion, were striking back. A sophisticated tracing protocol was attempting to lock onto her signal, bypassing layers of proxies she'd thought impenetrable. Fear, cold and raw, tightened its grip. This wasn't just any automated response. This was crafted by experts, backed by resources she couldn't fathom. She saw the digital tendrils of their trace bypassing her usual countermeasures with alarming ease. They weren't just tracing her IP, they were digging into her system, probing her hardware, triangulating her physical location with frightening efficiency. No, 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 she whispered, the words trembling on her lips. She yanked a cable from the main server stack behind her, the network lights dying instantly. She scrambled to another monitor, initiating physical drive wipes, a time-consuming process she prayed would finish before. Before what? Before they found her. The sounds from outside began to penetrate her focus, distant sirens, not specific, but part of the city's usual nocturnal symphony. Then something closer. The rumble of heavy engines, not traffic, focused, approaching. She risked a glance out the window. High above the streetlights of the Obsidian city, her apartment just another box of light in a vertical landscape dominated by steel and shadow. Nothing specific visible, but the feeling of approach was undeniable. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of her apartment. She had maybe minutes. Less. The digital counterintusion was relentless, chipping away at her firewalls, trying to establish a backdoor to confirm the source of the breach. She didn't finish wiping the main drive. The sounds outside solidified, heavy vehicles halting below, the distinct thud of doors slamming shut. Footsteps. Impossible to hear from this high up, but the air in her apartment felt different, charged with impending violence. A heavy, resonant asterisk thump echoed from the hallway outside her reinforced door. Not a knock, a challenge, followed by another. And then a deafening asterisk crash. The door splintered inward, ripped from its frame with brutal force. Wood shards and metal hinges flew across her living room. Silhouettes filled the gaping maw where her door had been, backlit by the harsh hallway light. They were large, dressed in dark, nondescript clothing, moving with swift, silent purpose. Leading them, stepping over the ruined doorframe as if it were a minor inconvenience, was a man who seemed to absorb the light around him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, radiating an aura of contained power that chilled Victoria to the bone. His face, partially shadowed, was hard, sculpted from granite. His eyes, she couldn't see their color, but she felt their intensity, were fixed directly on her. Dante Romano. The name surfaced unbidden from the files she'd just seen, a name associated with enforcement, resolution, and problem elimination. There was no hesitation. As soon as they cleared the entrance, the enforcers fanned out with practiced efficiency. One kicked over her server stack, sending a cascade of hardware crashing to the floor. Another ripped cables from the wall, silencing the screens still displaying her frantic deletion attempts. A third moved directly towards her, a blur of controlled force. Victoria barely had time to scramble back from her desk before strong hands grabbed her, wrenching her arms behind her back. A thick zip tie cinched tight around her wrists, cutting off circulation almost instantly. She cried out, a choked sound of pain and terror. She was roughly hauled upright, shoved towards the center of the room, her eyes locked on the man who had led the invasion. Dante Romano. He walked slowly towards her, his gaze sweeping over the chaos, the destroyed equipment, before settling back on her face. There was no rage in his expression, no triumph, only cold, clinical assessment, like a butcher examining a cut of meat. He stopped directly in front of her, close enough for her to see the sharp, almost beautiful lines of his face, the cruel set of his mouth. His eyes were dark, bottomless pools that seemed to strip away her defenses, laying bare her fear. She stood bound and trembling, her apartment a wreck around her, the digital world she commanded powerless against this brutal physical intrusion. "Victoria Cross?" His voice was a low rumble, smooth and dangerous like grinding stone. It held no question, only recognition. "You made a mistake." He reached out, his gloved fingers lifting her chin, tilting her face up slightly. His touch was firm, impersonal, utterly devoid of warmth. She flinched, not from pain, but from the sheer, terrifying presence of him. She could feel the residual heat of the monitors on her skin, the sting of the zip tie, the pounding of her heart, but his touch was the coldest thing in the room. The harsh reality of capture slammed into her, stealing her breath and leaving her trembling. Rough hands propelled her out of the ruined sanctuary of her apartment, away from the familiar chaos she'd created, and into the biting night air of Obsidian City. Bound and disoriented, catching terrifying, distorted glimpses of the soaring towers and neon glow through the windows of a fast-moving vehicle, she was no longer the hunter or the phantom. She was prey, utterly at the mercy of the silent, imposing man who held her fate in his terrifying hands. But the finality she'd braced for, swift, brutal elimination, didn't come. Not yet. Instead, the vehicle carried her higher, deeper into the city's opulent heart, towards a destination she couldn't comprehend, a place far removed from the street-level shadows she knew. Her life, so recently hers to risk or cherish, was now forfeit, held hostage by a man who seemed to see her not as a problem to be erased, but as something else entirely. As the ascent began, a new, chilling dread settled over her. Death might have been an ending, but whatever awaited her in the heights felt like a beginning she was powerless to stop. Chapter 2. The Skyfall Prison. The ascent was relentless, the vehicle carrying her ever higher above the familiar chaos of the street, the Obsidian City's neon grid blurring into a terrifying, distorted tapestry outside the reinforced windows. When the motion finally ceased, it was not in the grimy depths she'd expected, but in a sterile, silent space that promised something far more absolute than a simple cell. Bound and aching, she was roughly guided from the vehicle, the imposing shadow of Dante Romano a constant, chilling presence at her back, leading her towards a new kind of captivity high in the city's unreachable sky. Victoria's world had narrowed to the rough fabric gagging her mouth and the bite of the zip ties around her wrists. Disoriented, she registered only the jarring stop, the click of a door, and then the heavy, still air of something underground or deeply enclosed. Hands, not gentle, hauled her from the back of the secure vehicle. Her ruined apartment felt a lifetime ago, a sanctuary violated and left behind. The cold, clinical efficiency of her capture was more terrifying than outright brutality would have been. They knew exactly what they were doing. She stumbled, her legs weak from shock and the awkward position she'd been held in. A grunt from one of the enforcers behind her. She felt a firm, unwavering grip clamp onto her arm. Dante Romano. Even bound and blind to his face, she felt the sheer power radiating from him, a predator's stillness that promised swift, decisive action. "Get her out." His voice was low, gravelly, devoid of emotion. It was the last voice she'd heard in her apartment, the voice that had confirmed her worst fears. "Standard procedure dictates," one of the other men began, likely Lucaviti, whose face she dimly remembered from the violent entry. "Standard procedure dictates she's neutralized," Dante cut him off, the finality in his tone absolute. "She's not standard." "She's coming with me?" There was a beat of silence, thick with unspoken challenge and Dante's undeniable authority. Then, grudging acceptance. "Understood, boss. Not death. Not yet." A flicker of stunned disbelief warred with the terror clawing at her throat. Why? Why keep her alive? The question echoed in the void of her panic, unanswered. She was pushed forward into a space that smelled faintly of ozone and expensive air purification. The sounds of the city were muted here, distant hums barely penetrating. She felt herself being moved across a smooth surface, then into a smaller, enclosed space. The soft chime of a bell, an elevator. Fast, so fast it pressed her stomach into her spine. Up, always up. The journey felt endless, a ascent into the unknown. The city lights became streaks outside the narrow, reinforced slit of the vehicle's windows when she craned her neck, a river of fire flowing far below, mocking her. She was being lifted out of the world, away from any possibility of help or escape. The silent presence of Dante Romano beside her was a physical weight, heavy with implied threat. He didn't speak, didn't touch her again after the initial grasp, but she felt his gaze, cool and appraising, even through her terror. He wasn't just an enforcer, he was the one who had decided her fate, at least for this terrifying moment. When the elevator finally stopped, it was with a smooth, almost silent sigh. The doors opened onto a space that felt vast and empty. She was pulled out, her muscles screaming from the restraints. The gag was removed, tearing painfully at the corner of her lip. She gasped, sucking in air that tasted strangely sterile and clean. Eyes open, cross, Dante's voice was right behind her. "Look!" Her eyes, wide and stinging, blinked rapidly, trying to focus. They were in a pristine, minimalist foyer. Polished concrete floors gleamed under recessed lighting. The walls were stark white, adorned only by abstract art that looked impossibly expensive. Straight ahead, through a wide, seamless archway, was the sky. Not just the sky, but the entire Obsidian city spread out beneath them, a glittering, impossibly detailed map of light and shadow. They were breathtakingly high, perched on the edge of the world. The apex tower, the supposed impenetrable heart of the Thorn family syndicate, looked like just another spire in the distance, dwarfed by the sheer height of this location. The gritty ironworks district, a place she'd only seen in news reports, was a distant, darker patch on the sprawling canvas. This was the Skyfall penthouse. The name clicked into place, whispered rumors of a place so high, so secure, it was untouchable. Dante Romano's domain. The main living area unfolded before her, a vast, open space where furniture seemed sparse and deliberately placed, each piece a statement. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the entire curved outer wall, offering an uninterrupted, dizzying 270-degree panorama of the city below. It was beautiful, terrifying, and overwhelming. It wasn't just a view. It was a constant, inescapable reminder of the world she was cut off from. The sheer scale of the room, the height, the isolation, it pressed down on her, suffocating. Lucaviti and the other enforcers stood back, silent like statues. Only Dante moved, stepping past her, his boots making soft, measured sounds on the polished floor. He walked towards the windows, silhouetted against the city lights, his posture radiating casual dominance. Victoria stood trembling in the center of the room, her heart hammering against her ribs, adrenaline and fear a bitter cocktail in her mouth. Her gaze flickered around the room, searching desperately for anything that made sense, anything familiar. There was nothing, just sterile, expensive perfection and the crushing weight of her isolation. Dante turned back to her, his face emerging from the shadows, sharp and defined. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in dark, impeccable clothes that seemed to absorb the light. His eyes, dark and intense, met hers across the vast space. There was no warmth, no pity, only assessment. "Victoria Cross," he said, his voice still low but carrying effortlessly in the silent room. He said her name like a pronouncement, like it held some particular significance to him now. "You made a mistake." He repeated the line from her apartment, but here, in this unreachable height, it carried a different weight. Not just a statement of fact, but a declaration of ownership. He walked slowly towards her, closing the distance. She couldn't move, couldn't tear her eyes away from his. He stopped just a few feet from her, close enough that she could see the sharp line of his jaw, the controlled tension in his shoulders. "You breached the labyrinth," he stated, not a question. "Something no one has done successfully. You saw things you shouldn't have seen." He circled her slowly, like a shark, forcing her to turn to keep him in view. The usual response is severance, immediate, irreversible severance. He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "But you're interesting, your methods, the depth of the breach." He stopped in front of her again. "And you didn't scatter it, didn't try to sell it. You just tried to erase yourself." Victoria swallowed hard, her throat raw. She wanted to speak, to plead, to demand answers, but her voice was trapped by fear. "So," Dante continued, his gaze unwavering, "you're mine now, you belong to me." The words hit her with the force of a physical blow. Belong to him? Property? The terror intensified, but beneath it, a spark of something else ignited outrage. She, Victoria Cross, who valued her independence above all else, was now being declared property by a killer. "You are in my home," he gestured around the penthouse with a subtle sweep of his hand, encompassing the view, the luxury, the terrifying height. "This is your prison. Gilded, perhaps, but a prison nonetheless." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous murmur. "Your life is forfeit the moment you attempt to leave, the moment you attempt to contact anyone outside these walls, the moment you attempt to communicate anything you saw or anything you see while you are here." His eyes, dark and intense, bored into hers. "Do you understand? Your life belongs to me now. I can take it whenever I choose." He stepped back, the intensity receding slightly, replaced by that cold, calculating assessment. "Luca will show you to your accommodations. You will stay there unless I explicitly tell you otherwise. There are no locks you can pick, no windows you can break, no signals that can leave this building without my knowledge. Consider this a temporary arrangement. Your value is currently being assessed." He nodded to Luca, who stepped forward. Before Luca took her arm, Victoria found her voice, small and shaky but firm. You can't just do this," she whispered, fueled by a desperate, irrational defiance. Dante's lips curved into a thin, humorless smile. It didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, I assure you I can." Luca took her arm, his grip firm but not as rough as before. He began to guide her away from the main living area, towards a different part of the vast penthouse. As they moved, Victoria risked one last glance back at Dante Romano, standing alone by the panoramic windows, a dark, solitary figure against the backdrop of the city lights, the undisputed king of his Skyfall prison. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking out at the city, at his territory, seemingly already dismissing her. They walked down a long, silent corridor. The walls were paneled in a dark, rich wood, broken only by doorways that seemed to blend seamlessly into the structure. Every step reinforced the sense of being deep within his territory, high above the world. Luca stopped at one of the doors and opened it with a silent electronic keycard. He gestured for her to enter. "In here." "The boss's orders." Victoria hesitated, dread pooling in her stomach. This was it, her cage. "Don't try anything stupid," Luca said, his voice flat. "He's not playing games, just cooperate and maybe you live to see another sunrise." Maybe. The word offered no comfort. She stepped inside. The suite was spacious, easily larger than her entire apartment had been. It was decorated in the same minimalist style as the main living area, clean lines, muted colors, expensive materials. A king-sized bed dominated the center of the room, covered in luxurious, dark linens. There was a sitting area with a sleek sofa and a low table, a desk tucked into an alcove, and a door that likely led to a bathroom. It was asterisk luxurious. Impeccably clean, tastefully decorated, silent. But the luxury was cold, sterile. She was a specimen in an expensive, high-tech terrarium. Her eyes immediately went to the windows. Floor to ceiling, just like in the living room, offering another breathtaking view of the Obsidian City, this one slightly different in perspective but no less vast, no less overwhelming. They were beautiful, yes, but looking closer, she saw the subtle reinforcement in the frames, the impossibly thick glass. Even if she could open them, the fall would be unsurvivable. She tested the door Luca had opened. It was heavy, solid, and clicked shut with a finality that echoed in the silent room. Locked, definitely locked. She looked around desperately for a phone, an intercom, anything that might connect her to the outside world. Nothing. The desk was bare. The side table's empty save for a single minimalist lamp. There was no technology she could see, nothing she could potentially hack or use to signal. Luca lingered by the door for a moment, watching her. She met his gaze, trying to project a calmness she didn't feel. He just nodded, a curt, dismissive gesture, and then he was gone, the door closing behind him with that soft, decisive click. Alone. The zip ties still bit into her wrists. The gag was gone, but the silence felt almost as constricting. She was trapped. High above the city, in a cage of glass and steel, owned by a beautiful, terrifying man who had just told her life was his to take. The immediate surge of adrenaline began to subside, leaving behind a chilling emptiness. The reality of her situation crashed down on her with full force. Terror, raw and visceral, seized her. She sank onto the edge of the luxurious bed, the soft mattress a cruel contrast to the hardness of her fate. She wasn't just captured, she was erased, removed from existence, held in a private, unreachable prison. Disbelief warred with the undeniable evidence of her surroundings. How had this happened? How could her intellectual curiosity, her fascination with code, have led her here? Tears welled in her eyes, hot and stinging. For a moment, she let them fall, silent and helpless, the vast, uncaring city lights twinkling through the window like distant, mocking stars. The fear was immense, paralyzing. She was utterly alone, at the mercy of a man who dealt in death and saw her as property. She looked around the opulent cage, the city lights mocking her from below. Escape felt utterly impossible, a digital ghost trapped in a physical fortress built against her every instinct. She was a master key, but the lock was the entire world, and she was on the wrong side of it. Her skills felt useless here, or were they? The network wasn't just steel and code, it had a heart, a mind. It had a keeper. What did Dante Romano want? The question echoed, pulling her attention from the shimmering prison walls to the man who had put her there. The long night stretched ahead, a void before a dawn that would bring not freedom, but the true beginning of her test. The real complexity wasn't in breaching the system that held her physically captive, but in understanding the intricate, dangerous mind of the man who controlled it, and who, she suspected, was only just beginning to examine her asterisk. Chapter 3. Prisoner and Keeper. The endless night eventually ceded to a cold, colorless dawn that did not bring the liberation Victoria had desperately hoped for. Instead, it brought Luca, silent as ever, to escort her from the sterile comfort of her suite to the even more imposing presence waiting elsewhere in the penthouse. She walked into the vast main living space, the impossible city skyline a shimmering, indifferent backdrop, and came face to face with Dante Romano. The man who held her life in his hands regarded her with an unnerving, analytical gaze, and the psychological battle for which she had braced herself began. He sat in a minimalist chair that looked sculpted from shadow, positioned perfectly to view the panorama of Obsidian City stretching out below. The rising sun caught the glass and steel towers in a cold, hard light, like scattered jewels on a dark velvet cloth. It was a view of immense power, a stark reminder of who controlled this domain, both the penthouse itself and the sprawling metropolis it surveyed. Victoria stood a few feet away, acutely aware of Luca positioning himself silently by the entrance to the vast room. She wore the simple, unfamiliar clothes Luca had provided, soft gray trousers and a dark top, a world away from her preferred tech casual, a physical manifestation of her stolen identity. Dante didn't speak immediately. His eyes, the color of glacial ice, swept over her with unnerving thoroughness, lingering perhaps a second too long on the subtle tremors in her hands she couldn't quite control. There was no anger in his expression, no outward cruelty, just an intense, dispassionate curiosity that was far more terrifying than any overt threat. It felt less like being judged and more like being dissected. "Sit," he finally said, his voice a low, resonant rumble that filled the cavernous space without needing to be loud. He gestured to a matching chair opposite him. Victoria hesitated for a fraction of a second. Part of her screamed to refuse to stand her ground, but the pragmatic, survival-oriented part of her brain, the part that had always solved complex problems, told her that outright, senseless defiance now was suicide. She needed information. She needed to understand. She moved stiffly and sat, keeping her spine straight, meeting his gaze despite the prickling fear under her skin. "Victoria Cross," he began, the name sounding foreign on his tongue. "Cybersecurity expert, freelancer, known for discreet, impenetrable work." He paused, a faint, almost imperceptible shift in his posture. "And now, known for breaching the labyrinth." Victoria felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. He wasn't asking if she'd done it, he knew. "Why?" he asked, cutting to the chase. "Why target a secure server? Why the labyrinth?" She swallowed, her throat dry. I didn't target it, not like that." His gaze remained steady, unwavering. "Explain." "It was an intellectual challenge," she admitted, hating the way her voice trembled slightly. "A legend in certain circles, the labyrinth, supposedly impenetrable. I just wanted to see if I could." Dante leaned back slightly, his eyes narrowing almost imperceptibly. An intellectual challenge, he repeated, the words flat, devoid of emotion. You risked your life, your freedom, everything, for a puzzle. It's what I do, she said, finding a sliver of her usual resilience. I solve complex problems. This was the ultimate complex problem. You saw things, he stated, shifting gears. Financials, personnel records, operational data. Yes, she confirmed, the memory of the brutal efficiency detailed in those files sending a shiver down her spine. What did you do with it? Nothing, she said quickly, truthfully. I didn't download anything. I didn't transmit anything. My only thought was to cover my tracks, but... She trailed off, the memory of the rapid trace and the violent breach of her apartment vivid and horrifying. Our automated defenses are efficient, he said, a note of something akin to pride in his voice. You were fast, I'll give you that. Faster than anyone else has ever been. But not fast enough. His eyes seemed to bore into hers. Tell me about your process. How did you find the exploit? What tools did you use? Give me the technical details. This was different. He wasn't just confirming what she saw. He was probing her methodology, her skill set. He was trying to map her mind. This was the key, she realized. Her value wasn't just the data she might have taken, which he likely assumed was destroyed or irrelevant now that she was caught. Her value was her brain. She had to be careful. Giving him too much information would make her a valuable tool, potentially kept alive indefinitely to serve him. Giving him nothing might make her obsolete. She needed to walk a knife's edge. It was a zero-day exploit, she began, choosing to give him some technical jargon, but keeping it vague, abstract. A vulnerability in the handshake protocol, compounded by a timing error in the server's encryption key rotation. She spun technical-sounding terms, carefully avoiding specifics that could truly compromise systems or reveal unique methodologies. She watched his face as she spoke. He wasn't just listening, he was analyzing, weighing her words, separating truth from obfuscation. You're clever, he interrupted her technical monologue. It wasn't a compliment, but an observation, stated in the same flat tone as before. Trying to blind me with science or confuse me with irrelevance, Victoria met his gaze directly this time, finding a sliver of her defiance. I'm answering your questions, she said, her voice steadier now. You asked for the technical details. A flicker of something, amusement, annoyance, crossed his face, gone in an instant. Most people in your position would be begging for mercy, pleading. Weeping? Would that make me less interesting? She retorted, the dry wit she relied on as a defense mechanism bubbling to the surface despite the fear. His eyes held hers for a long moment. The air grew thick with unspoken tension. He didn't react with anger, which was unnerving. He simply watched her, that analytical gaze somehow intensifying, becoming almost predatory. Perhaps, he murmured, the word barely audible. He leaned forward again, resting his forearms on his knees. Your resilience is notable, most break quickly. Maybe I'm already broken, she said, the edge of cynicism in her voice masking a deeper weariness. He didn't respond to that. Instead, he shifted back. You know what happens to those who compromise our security. You said, severance, she whispered, the chilling term from the previous night echoing in her mind. Yes, it's clean, efficient. He made it sound like discussing a business process. But you are not efficient. You are a variable, an anomaly. An anomaly. That's why she was still breathing. He wasn't a typical thug. He was something colder, more calculating. A psychopath, her mind whispered, remembering the premise of her capture, the threat he represented, but one who was fascinated by her mind. He asked more questions, shifting back to her life before the hack. Her family, friends, connections. She gave him minimal, carefully curated answers. No close family. Few friends, mostly online acquaintances who wouldn't know her real identity or location. Her life, deliberately streamlined and focused on her work, ironically made her easier to isolate. Through it all, she subtly tested the boundaries. A slight hesitation before answering. A moment of direct eye contact. A question posed back to him, politely, carefully worded, never challenging his authority outright. He allowed it, watching her, observing how she reacted to his questions, how she managed her fear. He wasn't just collecting data points, he was observing a specimen. The interrogation continued for what felt like hours. The sun climbed higher, turning the city outside into a glittering, sun-drenched vista that only highlighted her isolation. She felt mentally drained, every nerve ending screaming from the tension, but she hadn't broken. She hadn't given him anything he didn't already know or couldn't easily find out, and crucially, she hadn't given him the keys to her unique abilities. Finally, he stood. The movement was fluid, powerful. "That is enough for now," he said, his voice signaling the end of the session. "You will remain here. Think about what you have seen. Think about what I have asked. There will be more questions." He turned and walked towards a doorway hidden seamlessly in the wall. Luca materialized from his silent vigil, gesturing for Victoria to follow him back towards her suite. As she rose, her legs unsteady, she glanced back at Dante. He paused at the hidden door, and his eyes met hers across the vast, silent space. For a fleeting second, the dispassionate analysis was replaced by something else, an intense, focused gaze that felt dangerously personal. Then it was gone, replaced by the familiar, controlled mask, and he disappeared through the door. Luca escorted her, wordlessly efficient, not back to her suite, but towards another part of the penthouse. The air grew colder as they moved away from the sun-drenched main living area. They entered a sleek, modern dining area dominated by a long, polished table. The view from here was just as spectacular, just as alienating. Dante was already seated at the head of the table. Another man, older, with sharp eyes and a quiet demeanor, stood near the wall, possibly Luca's superior, or simply another watchful presence. Luca gestured for Victoria to sit, indicating a chair several places away from Dante. A meal was served by silent, efficient staff who appeared and disappeared like ghosts. The food was exquisite, a stark contrast to the grim reality of her situation. Delicate pastries, fresh fruit, perfectly prepared eggs, artisanal bread. It was a meal fit for royalty, consumed in a prison cell hundreds of feet in the air. The silence was heavy, punctuated only by the faint clinking of silverware against porcelain. Victoria picked at her food, her stomach churning with a mix of fear and the alien feeling of being watched as she performed such a mundane act. "Eat," Dante commanded, his voice not unkind, but absolute. "You will need your strength." She forced herself to take a bite of fruit. It tasted like ash. She looked out the window at the endless city. "How many people live down there?" she mused, her voice quiet. Dante didn't immediately respond. "Millions," he finally said. "All living their lives," Victoria continued, more to herself than him. "Going to work, seeing friends, arguing with loved ones, completely unaware of the world just above their heads, the power structures that control them. Ignorance is often a form of protection," Dante said, his tone flat. "Or a weakness," Victoria countered, looking back at him. "If you don't know the threat exists, you can't defend against it." He met her gaze, a slow, calculating look that made her heart pound. "Perhaps. You live up here," she ventured carefully. "Above it all, is that protection?" "It is control," he corrected her, his voice hardening slightly. "From up here, I can see the patterns, the movements, anticipate the chaos." Victoria took a slow sip of water, buying time. "The data I saw." It wasn't chaos, it was highly organized. A muscle twitched in his jaw. "Order is imposed, maintained." "With severance?" she asked, pushing a little further, testing the line, his eyes fixed on hers. "When necessary, efficiency demands it." "And I am not efficient," she finished his previous statement. He didn't answer, but the intensity of his gaze was answer enough. She felt a surge of recklessness, fueled by exhaustion and the surreal nature of the meal. "This is quite the setup," she commented, gesturing vaguely at the luxurious surroundings. "Not quite what I expected from a syndicate enforcer." Dante's expression remained impassive, but the air around him seemed to chill. "You have misconceptions about our operations, Victoria. We are not common criminals. We are custodians of order, in our own way. Ordering the chaos," she murmured, looking back at the city. "Or controlling the chaos for your own benefit?" He didn't dignify that with a response, simply watched her, his silence more potent than any threat. She felt a dangerous pull in his gaze, a strange, dark magnetism that both repelled and fascinated her. He was a monster, a killer, yet he sat there, calmly eating breakfast, engaging in this bizarre, tense conversation with his captive. The meal ended as silently as it began. Luca appeared again, and Victoria was directed back towards the part of the penthouse she now knew was her designated suite. Once the heavy door closed behind her, the click of the lock echoing in the sudden silence, Victoria was finally alone. She sank onto the edge of the plush bed, her mind racing. She had survived the first encounter, even managed to push back slightly. But she was no closer to understanding his ultimate plan for her. Survival. That was step one. Understanding the prison was step two. She got up and began to explore her confines with a hacker's methodical curiosity. The suite was spacious, comprising a bedroom, a large bathroom, and a small sitting area. It was furnished with the same austere luxury as the rest of the penthouse. Her eyes scanned the walls, looking for subtle signs of surveillance. She saw none immediately, but she knew they would be there, hidden behind panels or disguised as fixtures. She went to the windows. Floor to ceiling, offering the breathtaking, terrifying view. She pressed her palm against the glass. It felt incredibly thick, solid, reinforced, designed to withstand more than just a stray bird. There was no way to open them, no latch, no seam. A gilded cage, indeed. The height was her greatest barrier. Even if she somehow bypassed the internal security, jumping was not an option. She checked the door. Heavy, solid wood, with a complex lock visible from the inside. No handle on the exterior side, just a smooth panel. Locked from the outside, obviously. She searched the room for anything she could use, a sharp object. A way to signal outside, ridiculous thought. From this height, in this secure building, anything she could potentially use to break something or bypass a security system. The room was meticulously sterile, devoid of anything remotely useful as a tool or weapon. Bookshelves held only decorative, unreadable volumes. Drawers contained only simple, functional clothing and toiletries. She examined the air vents, small and covered by sturdy grates. The light fixtures, recessed and tamper-proof. The television, mounted flush with the wall, likely monitored. The phone on the bedside table was for internal calls only, likely only to Luca or Dante. Every detail screamed secure containment. It wasn't a prison cell in the traditional sense. There were no bars, no concrete walls, but it was designed with the same objective: absolute control and isolation. The sheer luxury of it only emphasized the cold reality. It was a prison built for someone valuable, someone to be kept and perhaps utilized, not discarded. She walked back to the window, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. Down below, the city bustled, oblivious. It was a map of life and freedom she could no longer access. She felt a wave of despair wash over her, the crushing weight of her situation, trapped, high above the world in the hands of a man who saw her as an anomaly to be studied or perhaps broken and repurposed. She closed her eyes, forcing the despair back. No, despair was a luxury she couldn't afford. She was a problem solver. This was the biggest problem she had ever faced. She spent the rest of the day observing, thinking. Watching the subtle shifts in light across the cityscape, trying to discern patterns in Luca's appearances, always silent, always at the door. She cataloged every detail of the suite, every potential weakness, however small. Her analytical mind, her only weapon, was now focused entirely on survival and escape. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the Skyfall penthouse, Dante Romano stood before a large monitor displaying a muted, grainy feed of Victoria's suite. He watched her pace by the window, watched her methodically examine the room. His expression was unreadable. Luca stood silently behind him. "She is difficult," Luca ventured, breaking the silence. Dante didn't turn. "Difficult is preferable to predictable," he murmured, his gaze fixed on the screen. "Her defiance, she is not afraid enough," Luca stated, a hint of concern in his voice. Fear made people compliant. Victoria was not compliant. "Fear is a simple motivator," Dante said, finally turning from the screen. His eyes, still cold, held a flicker of something Luca couldn't decipher. "Her motivations are layered, her mind is complex." He paused, a slow, analytical smile touching the corner of his lips, a smile that never reached his eyes. "She challenges me, Luca, not with force, not with threats, with intellect. With spirit." He walked over to a different screen, displaying various security feeds and data streams from across the Obsidian city. The names of rival families, the Mortys and others, flashed across the screen, alongside reports of territorial disputes and enforcement actions. His attention shifted, becoming sharper, focused on the city's underbelly, the world he truly controlled. Maintain surveillance, Dante instructed, his voice returning to its usual controlled severity. Absolute security, no contact in or out, she is to remain completely isolated. He paused, then added, almost to himself, his gaze drifting back towards the feed from Victoria's suite, for now. The long day in the Skyfall penthouse settled into a tense quiet. Victoria Cross, the impossible problem, was contained. Secure within the heart of the labyrinth, held by the man who commanded its shadows. But outside the impenetrable glass, the Obsidian city breathed a different air. It was a predator's domain, a place built on veiled threats and unseen ears, where secrets had a price and silence was merely the calm before the inevitable storm. Dante Romano held his secret close, unaware of the seismic shift her breach had already sent through the city's foundations. For Victoria, the silence of her gilded cage was deceptive. Below, in the twisting streets and hidden rooms of the world she had briefly touched, whispers had begun to stir. Whispers that would soon climb the tower, carrying the weight of rival ambitions and the dangerous scent of leaked information, threatening to shatter the fragile peace she had inadvertently broken. Chapter 4. Whispers from Below. The silence of the Skyfall penthouse was a fragile veneer. Though still confined within its opulent walls, Victoria felt the Obsidian city's pulse not through direct sight, but through the periphery, the subtle shifts in Luca's perpetual vigilance, the abrupt changes in Dante's focus, and, most significantly, the low murmur of voices from rooms she was not meant to access. These weren't the frantic shouts of the streets, but the carefully modulated tones of power brokers, their hushed words hinting at forces stirred in the depths below, forces now climbing toward the very structure that held her captive. Several days had bled into one another since her arrival. The routine was monotonous, isolating. Escorted from her suite for meals, brief periods in the vast, sterile main living area, then back to her gilded cage. Luca, silent and ever-present, was her shadow, his quiet movements and stoic face a constant reminder of her lack of autonomy. But the silence wasn't absolute. It was punctuated by moments, brief windows, where the veneer cracked just enough for Victoria's sharp ears and hacker's mind to catch snippets, to begin assembling a terrifying picture. One afternoon, Luca escorted her past the large, closed double doors of Dante's study, a room she hadn't been allowed into. As they walked by, she heard Dante's voice, low and crisp, punctuated by Luca's deeper, more measured replies. The doors were thick, but sound bled around them, a low thrum against the polished floor. She slowed her pace subtly, stretching a phantom stiffness in her shoulder, her eyes flicking towards the closed doors. Breach. Significant, Dante's voice. Confirming. Patterns. Rivals. Inquiring. Luca. Thorn vulnerability. Cannot stand. Dante harder now. Containment. Priority. Luca. Asset secure. Ensure. Dante's voice faded as Luca gently but firmly guided her past. Asset secure. Her asterisk asset. The word landed with a cold thud in her stomach. She was not just a prisoner, she was a valuable, potentially dangerous item. The fragments were maddeningly incomplete, but they spoke of external detection, of vulnerabilities, of rivals. It was a language she instinctively understood, even if the players and stakes were obscured. She filed the keywords away, linking them to the labyrinth hack, the only event that could possibly explain her current predicament. Something she did had caused a ripple, and the ripple was now a growing swell outside these impenetrable walls. Later, she found herself alone for a short interval in the main living area, permitted access, while Luca presumably handled other duties within the vast apartment. The space was overwhelmingly minimal, reflecting the stark efficiency of its owner. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered that perpetual, dizzying view of Obsidian City, a sprawling tapestry of steel and light that felt both impossibly distant and menacingly close. Dante was nowhere in sight, likely in his study. Taking a calculated risk, Victoria edged towards a large screen embedded in the wall, usually displaying abstract digital art or the time. It was currently off. But nearby, on a minimalist console, she saw a tablet, clearly left unattended. Her heart hammered. A chance. She glanced quickly around the empty room, confirming Luca was absent. With trembling hands, she reached for it. It wasn't locked. Her fingers flew across the screen, her hacker's instinct taking over. Not to find an escape route, not yet, but to gather intelligence. The tablet was linked to a secure news aggregator, curated content from various sources, official channels, financial reports, and encrypted feeds that looked suspiciously like syndicate communications masquerading as market data. She scrolled furiously, filtering out the noise. Keywords: increased police presence, district clashes, Thorne family, Morty activity, unrest, market instability linked to unnamed factors. It was all there, couched in coded language but unmistakable. The city felt like a drum being beaten, the rhythm growing faster, more urgent. The news reports were vague to the outside world, but combined with the snippets she'd overheard, they formed a chilling narrative. Her hack wasn't just a secret breach, it had exposed something critical, something rival families were now circling like sharks. As she read, a notification popped up, a secure ping unique to the tablet. It was addressed to Dante Romano. Curiosity warred with terror. She hesitated for a split second, then tapped it open. It was a text-based message, short and brutal in its clarity. Intel confirms, Thorne labyrinth breach detected by Apex rivals. File IDs compromised match known critical operational data. Morty interest confirmed via multiple vectors. Vulnerability exploited. Recommend immediate containment and strategic response. Asset status critical. Victoria's blood ran cold. Asset status critical. She was the asset, the living embodiment of the compromised data. It wasn't just a vulnerability that was exploited. She was the vulnerability, or rather, her access was. The Thorne family, Dante's family or organization, had a critical weakness exposed, and the Mortys, a rival family hinted at in previous overheard fragments, knew it. Her stomach twisted. She hadn't just challenged a powerful syndicate. She had potentially tipped the scales in a brewing conflict, and she was caught squarely in the middle, the target. Before she could process the full implications, a door hissed open behind her. "Victoria," Dante. His voice was flat, devoid of inflection, but it carried a dangerous stillness that hadn't been there before. She whipped around, the tablet still clutched in her hand, the damning message open on the screen. His eyes, usually cool and analytical, were sharper, colder, fixed first on the tablet, then on her face. Luca stood silently behind him. "Putting your curiosity to work, I see," Dante said, stepping further into the room. His gaze was intense, assessing. He didn't look angry, not in the explosive way she might have expected. He looked focused, like a predator studying its prey, not for the kill, but for how best to utilize it. She started, her voice barely a whisper. There was no point in lying. He already knew what she had seen. Dante crossed the room in a few fluid strides, taking the tablet from her hand. His fingers brushed hers, sending a shiver that had nothing to do with fear down her arm. He glanced at the screen, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. "You understand what this means," he stated, not a question. Victoria swallowed, finding her voice. "That my hack wasn't as clean as I thought, that someone else saw what I saw, or saw that I saw it, and they know it points back to the Thorne family." Dante nodded slowly, his eyes still locked on her. "Morty intelligence is sharp. They move fast, faster than we anticipated on this." He gestured to the tablet. "This intel confirms they understand the nature of the files you accessed. They see a weakness in the labyrinth and by extension in us." He pocketed the tablet. The air in the room grew heavy, charged. His gaze intensified, shifting from analytical to something more possessive, almost predatory. "And you, Victoria," he said, stepping closer, invading her personal space, forcing her to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "You are the key, the living proof. The spark that has just landed in the tinderbox." He didn't sound angry or even particularly concerned for her asterisk. His concern was for the situation, for the threat she represented, both internally and externally. "They will come for you," he continued, his voice a low growl that resonated in her chest. "Not because you are a threat asterisk to them, but because you are a threat to us asterisk. A way to expose our vulnerabilities, to leverage against us. The Mortys, anyone who sees an opportunity to destabilize things, they know the breach happened. They know the data was compromised. What they don't know precisely is who did it and where that person is now. He paused, his eyes raking over her face. Until now, you were my prisoner, a problem to solve, an anomaly to study. Now, you are a target. A chill that had nothing to do with the penthouse's climate control snaked down her spine. She was a target. Not just from him, but from everyone else. But you are my target, Dante said, his voice dropping lower, becoming almost a possessive whisper. The shift in his demeanor was stark. The cold analysis was still there, but now layered with a fierce, almost terrifying possessiveness. You breached my secure vault. You saw our secrets. You are mine to control. He reached out, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw, sending that strange current through her again. It was not a gesture of comfort or affection, but of claiming, of ownership. This penthouse was secure. Now it needs to be a fortress. Your existence is a liability that must be contained. To the outside world, you don't exist. If they think you do, they will hunt you, and if they find you... He didn't need to finish the sentence. She knew, severance. But this time, it wouldn't be from the Thorns. It would be from their rivals who would exploit her knowledge or simply eliminate the loose end. He took a step back, his hand dropping, breaking the unsettling contact. Luca will increase patrols. All external communications are now suspended, even internal non-essential ones are restricted. Access codes are being changed. Your movements outside your suite will be even more limited. Do not approach windows that can be seen from distant buildings. Do not speak to anyone but me or Luca. Do not make any attempt to communicate with the outside or even signal your presence. His eyes were glacial. Your survival now depends entirely on remaining unseen, unknown, and on my ability to keep you contained. He wasn't protecting her because he cared. He was protecting her because she was the living evidence of a critical failure within his organization, a vulnerability that his rivals now sniffed out. She was a precious, dangerous secret he had to guard with absolute ruthlessness. Her life was forfeit to the world below, but valuable to the monster holding her captive. Returned to the stark luxury of her suite, the reinforced door closing behind her with a soft, final click, Victoria stood in the middle of the room, the silence pressing in. The panoramic view of the city, moments ago a distant, abstract beauty, now felt like a million watchful eyes. She walked over to the reinforced window, keeping a cautious distance, looking out at the lights of Obsidian City twinkling below. Millions of lives, unaware of the shadowy war being waged in their midst, or the tiny, insignificant data breach high above that was accelerating the timeline. She understood now. The chilling clarity settled deep in her gut, a cold knot of fear and bitter irony. She wasn't just a captive, she was the catalyst, the disruption that had torn the veil. Her very existence was the spark. And the man who had dragged her into this hell, the one she should hate and fear the most, Dante Romano, was suddenly her reluctant, terrifying protector. The game wasn't just about her escape anymore. It had escalated into something vast and terrible, a war she had inadvertently triggered, and she was trapped at its epicenter, dependent on the monster to shield her from the monsters he usually ruled. The tension that had been a low hum now vibrated through the reinforced glass walls of the penthouse. The city lights below weren't just twinkling, they seemed to hold their breath. The monsters below weren't just hungry, they were about to be unleashed. The stakes were terrifyingly clear. She was the prize, the proof, the source of the chaos. And the war, the one she had been told was coming, wasn't a future threat anymore. It was here. Now. And she was locked inside with the man who held the keys, as the city prepared to burn around them. Chapter 5. The Spark of War. The air in the Skyfall penthouse remained charged, the silence after Dante's chilling declaration thick with the weight of impending conflict. Below, the city lights still twinkled, but they were a fragile facade over a powder keg Victoria knew she had ignited. Dante didn't waste a second on recrimination. His eyes, cold and sharp, were already calculating the fallout. His next move dictated by the enraged summons arriving from the head of the Thorn family, the very man who now saw her as the liability that must be removed. Victoria watched from her designated spot near the panoramic windows as Dante moved towards a large, holographic display screen recessed into the wall. His movements were precise, economical, every muscle coiled with controlled tension. Luca Vitti, ever the silent shadow, stood a few paces behind, his gaze fixed on Dante. The summons wasn't a call or a message. It was a direct, high-priority channel opening, the Thorn family sigil pulsing ominously on the screen. A face materialized on the display, sharp and cold as shattered ice. Silas Thorn, the man whose secure data vault she had breached, whose empire now trembled on the brink. His eyes, dark and devoid of warmth, swept over Dante. Victoria felt a prickle of dread, sensing the immense, absolute authority radiating from the projection. This was the true power behind the Obsidian City's veiled control. Romano, Silas's voice was low, resonant, carrying a deadly calm that was far more terrifying than any shout. Apex was notified of the labyrinth breach. Moments later, our rivals were notified. File metadata compromised. Red flags across the network. You were the first response. You found the source. Dante stood at attention, respectful but not subservient in his posture. Silas, the source was a civilian, a technocrat named Victoria Cross. Isolated incident. No known ties to rival families. Silas's gaze shifted slightly, as if he knew Victoria was within earshot, perhaps even visible on a secondary feed. Victoria fought the urge to shrink back, gripping the sill behind her. Civilian or not, she touched what wasn't hers. And in doing so, she opened the door for the Mortys. She claimed to have destroyed the critical data immediately upon discovery, Dante said, his tone carefully neutral. Her equipment was seized and destroyed. We found no trace of outbound transmission of sensitive files. Her immediate goal was self-preservation, covering her tracks. Self-preservation is irrelevant now, Silas cut him off, his voice hardening. What she saw, what she is a walking security breach. A known vector. The Mortys know she exists. They know we know she exists. She represents a vulnerability we cannot afford. She must be handled. Permanently. Now, Victoria's breath hitched. Handled, permanently. The chilling Thorn euphemism for elimination. This was it. The order. Silas Thorn wanted her dead. Dante hesitated for a fraction of a second, imperceptible to anyone who didn't know him. But Victoria felt it, a subtle shift in the air around him. Silas, with respect, her value as an intelligence asset regarding the breach methods, her unique skill set, it might be beneficial to retain her for a short period, to understand how she bypassed our security, to ensure there are no other unknown vectors. Silas's eyes narrowed. Our cybersecurity teams can handle the technical analysis. You handle the loose ends. This is not a negotiation, Dante. She is a liability. Eliminate her. Confirm when it is done. The absolute finality in Silas's voice was crushing. Victoria's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. This was Silas Thorn, the ultimate authority, giving a direct, non-negotiable command. No one defied Silas Thorn and lived. She was dead. She was already dead. But Dante didn't immediately assent. He didn't offer the curt understood that Silas expected. Instead, he met Silas's unblinking stare. The situation is complex. Her knowledge isn't purely technical. It's intuitive, an understanding of systems, weak points. The labyrinth breach was unprecedented. It would be premature to silence her before extracting every possible bite of insight into her methods. We need to know how deep this cut goes before we close it. Silas's patience was wearing thin. Are you questioning my orders, Romano? The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Never, Silas, merely. Optimizing the response, Dante said, his voice still steady, betraying none of the internal struggle Victoria sensed. He was walking a tightrope. He wasn't refusing outright, but he wasn't agreeing to immediate action either. He was buying time, weaving a fragile excuse around her existence. I understand the urgency. I will ensure the vulnerability is neutralized, but her unique insight might save us from future breaches of this scale. Allow me to manage this, personally. The asset is secure within my domain. No one enters without my clearance. She is no longer a risk to the network. She is contained. A long, pregnant silence stretched between them. Silas studied Dante, his expression unreadable. He knew Dante wasn't just anyone. He was his most effective enforcer, ruthless and loyal. But loyalty had limits, and Silas had no tolerance for insubordination, no matter how subtly veiled. Victoria held her breath, expecting Silas to issue a chilling ultimatum. Finally, Silas spoke, his voice laced with cold suspicion. "You have 24 hours, Romano, to deliver either a comprehensive analysis of her methods and confirmation of her destruction, or her corpse. Do not make the mistake of valuing an anomaly over the security of the family. Do not make me regret placing my trust in you." The image of Silas Thorne vanished, leaving the screen blank and dark. The silence that descended felt heavier than before. Victoria dared to look at Dante. His face, previously a mask of controlled composure, was now taut, his jaw clenched. He had defied Silas for her asterisk, not explicitly, not with a shout, but with a carefully constructed refusal to immediately comply, trading on his value and his perceived control. He had bought her a little time, a precarious stay of execution. But he hadn't saved her. He had just postponed her inevitable fate, linking it now directly to his own standing with Silas Thorne. Luca cleared his throat, a low, rumbling sound. "Sir, the order." "The order is understood, Luca," Dante said, his voice low and dangerous. He turned, his eyes locking onto Victoria. The analytical detachment from before was gone, replaced by a raw intensity. He hadn't looked at her with such direct, possessive focus since the night he captured her. "You heard him. Silas Thorne wants you gone. And now, your fate is intertwined with my ability to explain why I haven't complied. Your unique insight just became your temporary shield. You will provide it." Before Victoria could formulate a response, a shrill, piercing wail sliced through the penthouse's soundproofing. Then another, and another. Sirens. Not the distant, everyday sounds of the city, but a chorus of urgent, panicked screams from the streets below. Dante's head snapped towards the windows. Luca was already moving to activate various screens around the main living area. News feeds, internal Thorne network alerts, live street camera feeds flickered to life. The calm, twinkling facade of the Obsidian city was shattered. On multiple feeds, chaos erupted. In what looked like the ironworks district, fire trucks wailed towards plumes of black smoke rising from industrial buildings. Flashing lights, police, ambulances, unmarked cars converged on key intersections. Red markers flashed across a territorial map of the city displayed on one screen, indicating skirmishes, blockades, and confirmed engagements. "Report," Dante barked at Luca, his attention now fully on the unfolding disaster. Luca's fingers flew across a terminal. Thorne distribution hub in the Ironworks district under heavy assault. Coordinated attack. Morty sigils confirmed on the ground. Simultaneously, Thorne processing centers in the financial district are being targeted by diversionary attacks. Seems they anticipated our primary defenses would be near Apex Tower. "This is a full-scale offensive, sir. Morty is moving on our territory." "Morty," Dante repeated, his voice a low growl. Marco Morty, the aggressive, ambitious head of the rival family. He hadn't wasted time. Her hack, the compromised data, the perceived weakness, it had been the signal he needed. The spark. Victoria watched in horror as the city below transformed from a distant, beautiful abstraction into a battlefield. The sounds of sirens were now joined by the faint, but distinct crackle of automatic gunfire echoing up the skyscraper's sides. A distant boom vibrated through the thick glass, followed by a rush of panicked shouts from a street feed before the camera cut out. "They moved fast," Dante said, his eyes scanning the screens, processing the overwhelming influx of data. He wasn't surprised, he was calculating, analyzing angles, force concentrations, potential countermoves. This was his world, this was war. And Victoria, trapped with him high above the carnage, was its accidental architect. "My hack," Victoria whispered, the words tasting like ash. This is because of me?" Dante glanced at her, his expression grim. "You exposed a weakness. They exploited it. You were the spark, yes, but the powder keg has been ready for years. Thorne dominance has been challenged before. Morty just decided now was the time to light the fuse." He didn't offer comfort, only brutal confirmation. Urgency filled the penthouse. Dante was issuing orders now, rapid-fire commands to unseen subordinates via encrypted comms. He was mobilizing Thorne forces, directing resources, assessing the situation. Luca was a blur of activity, relaying information, bringing up new feeds, confirming targets. Fortify perimeter Beta and Gamma, Dante commanded into a headset. Priority assets secured. Maintain lockdown. No one in, no one out. Luca, double the external patrols for this sector. If anyone even looks at this building sideways, you light them up. His gaze flickered back to Victoria. She was a priority asset, her security paramount. Not for her safety, but for Asterisk, his control over her, for his ability to keep her from Sela's, and to keep her from falling into Morty hands. She was his leverage, his secret. He moved with purpose now, a predator preparing for the hunt. From a hidden compartment in the wall, he retrieved a sleek, black assault rifle and began checking its magazine. Luca armed himself as well. The atmosphere shifted from tense containment to active defense. "Stay away from the windows," Dante ordered Victoria, his voice clipped and sharp. "The glass is reinforced, but don't test it. The city below is about to get very messy." He paced as he spoke into his comms, a general commanding his troops from his high-altitude bunker. The sounds of the war filtered in, a constant reminder of the violence consuming the streets she used to walk freely. Victoria hugged herself, the sterile air of the penthouse suddenly feeling heavy and suffocating despite the sprawling views. She was trapped in the eye of the storm she had created, dependent on the man who held her captive for protection from the monsters she had unleashed. After ensuring the immediate defenses of the penthouse and surrounding Thorn territory were being addressed, Dante finished his calls. He placed his weapon on a nearby console, the black metal stark against the minimalist decor. The screens still flickered with images of chaos below. Sirens continued to scream. He turned fully to Victoria, the urgent energy from his command state slowly bleeding into something else, something darker and more focused. The war outside hadn't diminished the tension between them, it had amplified it, twisting it into something volatile and raw. Fear warred with defiance in her eyes. Possessiveness and something akin to grim satisfaction flickered in his. He had kept her from Sela's. He had defied the supreme authority for this woman who had shattered his world, and in doing so, validated his irrational decision. He walked towards her slowly, deliberately, like a wolf stalking prey it already owned. The light from the burning city below cast long, dancing shadows across the room, making the familiar space seem alien and dangerous. The sounds of battle were a pulsing soundtrack to their silent confrontation. "You saw what you did," Dante said, his voice low, closer now. "You ripped the veil, you started this." Victoria swallowed, her throat tight. "I didn't mean to." "Meaning is irrelevant," he interrupted, reaching out to cup her jaw in his hand. His touch was firm, possessive, sending a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with cold. "Consequences are everything, and the consequence is war. The consequence is this city burning. The consequence is Sela's Thorn wanting your head on a platter." His thumb traced the line of her jaw, a dangerous caress. Her gaze was locked on his, fear mixing with the dangerous fascination she couldn't deny. His eyes, normally cold, held a feverish intensity born of the night's events. He had faced down Sela's Thorn, he was directing a war, and yet his focus was entirely on her. "He wants you dead," Dante repeated, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "And I told him no. I bought you time, time to explain yourself, time to prove you're worth the risk." His fingers tightened slightly. "Or time for me to decide myself." The power was absolute, overwhelming, he owned her. Her life, her body, her very breath was his to command, to use, to extinguish. The violence consuming the city outside seemed to funnel into the charged space between them, amplifying the raw, primal dynamic of captor and captive. He leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear, a stark contrast to the cold, sterile environment. The sounds of distant gunfire seemed to pulse in sync with her racing heart. "Every killer in the city wants you, Victoria," he murmured, his voice a dark promise. "But you're mine, and no one takes what belongs to me." His lips brushed against her temple, then trailed down her cheek, a possessive claim amidst the chaos. Fear made her tremble, but the terrifying intimacy of his touch, fueled by the adrenaline and the stark reality of their situation, ignited a dangerous spark within her, mirroring the war outside. Defiance had become tangled with something darker, something primal that responded to the ruthless power he exuded. He tilted her head back gently, forcing her to meet his gaze. The city blazed behind them, a testament to the destruction she had wrought and the world he commanded. His eyes were pools of dark intensity, reflecting the fires below. Victoria's hands tightened on the fabric of his shirt, holding onto the dangerous anchor as the city below erupted in fire and screams. The spark she had ignited had become a conflagration, its roar muffled but undeniable even from this height. In the eye of the storm she had helped unleash, their personal battle was now inextricably linked to the brutal war unfolding in the streets. High above the chaos, the gilded cage offered no true sanctuary. The rumble of distant explosions, the faint wail of sirens climbing the air, served notice. The war she'd helped start was coming for them, too. Trapped together as the city tore itself apart, survival would demand more than just steel and power. It would forge a necessary, dangerous alliance in the heart of the tempest, where the lines between captor and captive would blur even further, and the true test of their bound fates would begin. Chapter 6: The Eye of the Storm. The Skyfall penthouse, suspended high above the Obsidian city's screaming inferno, felt less like a sanctuary and more like the fragile, still center of a violent hurricane. Victoria, still reeling from Dante's possessive claim and the terrifying confirmation of her role, could feel the city's rage clawing its way up the building's sides, a physical manifestation of the war she had sparked. High in this gilded cage, surrounded by the muffled sounds of conflict and the low thrum of activated defenses, Dante, grim-faced and decisive, began to command his forces, preparing to defend their exposed position in the very heart of the storm. Victoria stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows in the main living area, the panoramic view of Obsidian City, usually a symbol of Dante's untouchable power. Tonight, it was a tableau of chaos. Distant fires painted the sky an unnatural orange in the direction of the ironworks district. Sirens wailed below, a relentless, mournful chorus. The rhythmic thud of heavy rotorcraft occasionally vibrated through the reinforced glass. Dante moved with predatory efficiency around the vast space, which had been transformed into a tense command center. Holographic displays flickered with tactical maps and data feeds. Luca, usually a silent shadow, was a hub of quiet activity, relaying messages, confirming orders, his face tight with strain. Other men, equally grim, moved with purpose through the penthouse, securing access points, monitoring systems, their presence a constant reminder of the fortress Skyfall had become. "Report on the ironworks push," Dante commanded, his voice sharp, cutting through the background noise. Luca tapped a display. "Morty forces are hitting the refinery district hard. Trying to cut off fuel supply lines. Thorn teams holding but taking losses. They're bypassing standard comms using encrypted runners. Casualties? Heavy on both sides. The Apex Tower reports multiple probing attacks on its perimeter defenses. Silas is reinforcing the financial sector." Victoria listened, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. This wasn't just abstract data on a screen, this was real violence, real death, unfolding because of her. She watched Dante, his jaw clenched, eyes scanning the data feeds, his authority absolute. He wasn't just receiving reports, he was making rapid-fire decisions, sending reinforcements here, authorizing a tactical retreat there, his movements economical and deadly. He looked less like a man and more like the apex predator his world demanded. The grim reality of what custodians of order truly meant slammed into her. It meant control through overwhelming force, violence as a primary tool. The air in the penthouse was thick with tension, a palpable pressure that mirrored the chaos below. Every call, every report, underscored the precariousness of their position. Dante's resources were stretched thin, his attention divided between defending his territory, supporting Silas, and maintaining the impenetrable facade of Skyfall Penthouse, her gilded cage. She was an enormous vulnerability he had chosen to keep, and the war was a constant threat trying to rip her away, either to use against him or simply to eliminate. Luca intercepted a message, his eyes narrowing. "Intel from the docks. Morty runners are using a new encryption cipher for battlefield comms. Our intercept teams can't break it fast enough." Dante swore under his breath. "Silas is bleeding assets because we can't get eyes on their movements." Send the data packets to encryption team Gamma. Tell them I need it yesterday. Luca hesitated. Gamma reports heavy firewall engagement in the financial sector. They're prioritizing Apex Tower defense. A muscle twitched in Dante's jaw. He ran a hand over his short, dark hair, his gaze sweeping across the frantic data displays, then, slowly, settling on Victoria. There was a calculating gleam in his eyes that made her skin prickle. The study was a minimalist space of dark wood and polished metal, dominated by a large, secure display screen. Dante gestured curtly towards a chair before it. Victoria sat, her heart hammering a nervous rhythm against her ribs. This was different. This wasn't interrogation. This was collaboration. Dante projected a complex stream of data onto the screen, jumbled characters, network traffic logs, what looked like partially corrupted code. These are the comms intercepts Luca mentioned. Encrypted, their standard ciphers were weak. This is something else. He leaned against the edge of the desk, watching her, his expression unreadable. Gamma is useless right now. I need to know what the Mortys are planning, where they're hitting next. This new cipher is locking us out. Victoria stared at the screen, her analytical mind, dormant during days of terrified isolation, stirring to life. It was a problem. A difficult, complex problem. Years of instinct took over. She leaned forward, her fingers hovering over a console linked to the display. "Can I?" she began, glancing at Dante, expecting him to deny her access to anything technical. "Do what you do," he said, his voice low, almost grudging. "But understand this, Cross. You are not doing this to help asterisk them." He gestured to the screen. "You are doing this because I need it done. Your value is in your mind. Prove it." Victoria nodded, a strange mix of fear and exhilaration coursing through her. This was a chance to be something more than just a captive, a potential asset. It was a chance to use the one thing she had left, her brain. She began to work. Her fingers flew across the input devices, navigating through the data streams, isolating packets, searching for patterns. She wasn't just trying to brute force a key. She was analyzing the asterisk structure of the encryption, the anomalies in the data flow, looking for digital fingerprints or hints of underlying algorithms she might recognize or break down. She talked aloud, thinking through the problem, a habit from late-night hacking sessions. "Okay, this isn't standard AES or RSA. There are irregular block sizes. It looks like they've built a custom layer on top of something common." Trying to find the initial handshake protocol, Dante didn't interrupt. He just watched, his initial tension replaced by a focused stillness. Victoria could feel his gaze, intense and unwavering, a pressure that spurred her on even as it made her acutely aware of him. She worked for what felt like hours, the war outside fading into a distant hum as her concentration narrowed to the data on the screen. She hit dead ends, backtracked, tried new angles. It was maddeningly complex, but the challenge was exhilarating. Finally, she saw it, a subtle pattern in the metadata flow, an echo of a technique she'd researched years ago, a sophisticated, almost theoretical approach to obscuring data streams. It wasn't a weakness, but a signature. "Got it," she murmured, leaning back slightly. "It's a dynamic key exchange, nested. They're generating unique session keys for every transmission, but the root seed, it's tied to a network signature. If we can isolate a point-of-origin signal from one of their field units, maybe piggyback the analysis off that." Dante straightened, his eyes sharp. "You can break it." "Not break it in the traditional sense," Victoria explained, her voice tight with concentration. "But I can build a real-time analysis engine to predict the key generation asterisk as asterisk the transmission happens. It would need live data from the field, though." An active intercept from a secure channel. A slow, dangerous smile touched Dante's lips. It wasn't a pleasant smile. "Luca," he spoke into a calm peace, his voice carrying through the study. "Prioritize intercepts from the Ironworks perimeter. Need an active channel from the forward units. Patch it through to the study. Now." He looked back at Victoria, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, not respect, not yet, but a definite acknowledgement of her capability. "You are proving." "Useful, Cross?" The admission felt like pulling teeth for him. He didn't like needing her, Victoria could see that clearly. It challenged his control, his self-sufficiency. But the war demanded results, and she was the only one who could deliver this specific kind. Later, back in the main living area, the atmosphere remained taut. Victoria sat observing, having provided the framework for the real-time decryption, while technicians Luca had brought in worked under her remote guidance, feeding the system live battlefield data. The flow of information was still sporadic, but chunks of decrypted Morty-comms were starting to appear on the displays, unit positions, supply movements, potential targets. Dante took a call on a secure channel, his back to Victoria, his voice low and clipped. Status report. Casualties heavy. Not acceptable. They breached Sector 7. How? Find the leak. Eliminate asterisk it. No, not relocation. Sanction, make an example. Public. I want the message sent loud and clear to anyone else considering turning. Use the standard protocol. Leave nothing traceable back to us, but ensure the body is found. Yes, by dawn. Good. He hung up, turning back to the room. His face was impassive, but his eyes held a cold, calculating intensity that sent shivers down Victoria's spine. The brutal detachment in his voice, the casual authorization of murder and public display, was chilling. This wasn't a theoretical monster, this was the reality. He commanded death with the same efficiency he commanded troop movements. He caught her eye. Victoria couldn't hide the horror she felt, the revulsion that tightened her throat. Dante walked towards her, his steps measured. Problem, Cross? You ordered someone killed, she whispered, the words catching in her throat. Just like that for a leak. Leaks cost lives, Cross, he said, his voice dangerously soft. Thorn lives, my men's lives. In a war you cut out the rot before it spreads. It's necessary. Necessary, she repeated, shaking her head. To make an example, that's not protection, that's terror. It's both, Dante stated, his gaze unwavering. Control isn't built on permission. It's built on consequences. Fear is a powerful deterrent. More powerful than any lock or firewall you could ever build. He paused, his eyes sweeping over her, making her feel exposed. You see the game, Cross. It's not about laws or justice. It's about power, and power demands a price. Sometimes that price is paid in blood. He didn't justify it, didn't apologize. He simply stated it as a fact of his world. He was the monster she had feared, the ruthless enforcer. And knowing that, seeing it stripped bare, should have solidified her hatred, her fear. But intertwined with the horror was a strange, terrifying fascination. He was utterly himself, brutally honest about the darkness he inhabited. And she, trapped in his orbit, felt the pull of that darkness, even as it repelled her. Hours later, the intense focus of command had receded slightly, replaced by a heavy exhaustion that settled over the penthouse. The sounds of the war hadn't ceased, merely changed in intensity. The air felt charged, not just with the lingering stress of conflict, but with the potent, unspoken tension between Victoria and Dante. Dante found her by the windows again, staring out at the scarred cityscape. Luca was elsewhere, overseeing repairs or handling logistics. They were alone in the vast living space, the only light coming from the distant fires and the glow of remaining data screens. Can't sleep? He asked, his voice low, devoid of its usual edge. Hard to sleep when the city is screaming, she replied, not turning around. He didn't respond for a moment, simply stood behind her, his presence a heavy weight in the silence. You did good work tonight, Cross. The intel from the intercepts. It saved lives, Thorn lives. Victoria finally turned to face him. And how many lives did your necessary actions cost? His expression hardened slightly. Different ledger. Different accounting. Do you ever regret it? She asked, pushing, compelled by some reckless urge. The violence, the killing. Dante stepped closer, invading her space, forcing her to look up at him. Regret is a luxury I can't afford. Not in this city, not in this life. Every decision is about survival, mine and theirs. He gestured vaguely towards the city. And now, yours. His gaze dropped to her lips. The air crackled between them, thick with the unspoken history of their encounters. The capture, the imprisonment, the forced intimacy of her dependence on him, the volatile kiss amidst the war's outbreak. The horror of witnessing his ruthlessness warred with the undeniable, confusing spark that ignited whenever he was near. The sheer impossibility of her situation, the stress of the war, the isolation, it all amplified the dangerous attraction, twisting fear into a perverse kind of vulnerability, defiance into desperate longing. He reached out, his hand tracing the line of her jaw. His touch was surprisingly gentle, a stark contrast to the brutal orders she had heard him give. "You see the darkness now, Victoria. You see what I am." "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "I see, and yet," his thumb brushed across her lower lip, sending a jolt through her, "you still look at me like you want to understand." "I want to survive," she corrected, though it felt weak even to her. "Survival has many forms," Dante murmured, leaning closer. His breath ghosted over her face. "Some are closer than others." The war raged outside, a symphony of destruction. Inside, in the eye of that storm, another battle was unfolding, quiet but no less intense. It was a battle for control, for identity, for the very definition of their relationship. He owned her body, her freedom, but she had seen his soul, the chilling core of his world. And in that moment, surrounded by the terror she had unleashed and the monster who held her captive, the line between control and surrender blurred, between repulsion and a desperate, dangerous need for connection in the overwhelming isolation. He lowered his head, his lips meeting hers. The kiss was different this time. Not a possessive claim like the last, but something deeper, more complex. It was raw, fueled by the stress, the danger, the strange, twisted understanding that had begun to form between them. His hand cupped the back of her head, drawing her closer, deepening the kiss. Her mind screamed defiance, screamed escape, but her body responded, a traitorous heat flooding through her, a visceral reaction she couldn't suppress. She responded to his touch, to the intensity of the moment, lost in the dangerous space between prisoner and keeper, fear and fire. She was trapped, not just by locks and windows, but by the volatile alliance forged in the heart of the storm. Her unique position, bound to Dante Romano by dangerous currents of power and vulnerability, solidified her predicament. She was a strategic asset now, valued not just for her skills, but for the very connection that made her a prime target for everyone tearing the city apart. The war outside might try to claim her, but Dante would fight to keep her, for his own complex reasons, making her presence within his walls an even more coveted, more dangerous prize. The eye of the storm wasn't a sanctuary. It was merely a new battleground, one where the forces beyond their reinforced glass would now focus their terrifying intent. The city's chaos hadn't faded with the night. It was simply shifting, gathering momentum, and the quiet before dawn felt less like peace and more like the coiled spring of imminent disaster, threatening to breach the very defenses she now depended upon. She was within the cage, but the monsters outside knew exactly where she was. Chapter 7, Trust in the Darkness. The quiet before dawn settled over the penthouse, a fragile deception that felt less like respite and more like the held breath of a city coiled for slaughter. Below, the fires still burned, but the chaos was no longer distant. It had found its focus, its terrifying intent now aimed squarely at the reinforced walls of her gilded cage. Klaxons shrieked, a visceral tearing of the silence, confirming what she already knew. The monsters were finally at the door. The high-pitched wail of the external security alarms ripped through the pre-dawn quiet, a sound Victoria hadn't heard since arriving at the Skyfall penthouse. It wasn't the distant wail of emergency services she'd grown accustomed to, but a close, piercing cry that vibrated through the very structure of the building. The panoramic views, usually a source of detached observation, now became windows onto her immediate peril. Red lights pulsed across the glass from automated defense turrets activating below, painting the luxurious living space in strobing crimson. Victoria bolted upright in her sweet bed, heart hammering against her ribs. Footsteps pounded in the corridor outside, urgent and heavy. She scrambled to the reinforced window, pressing her palms against the cool glass, trying to see past the internal reflection. Far below, tiny figures rappelled down the side of the adjacent skyscraper, their lines taut against the night sky. Morty, Thorn rivals, it didn't matter. They weren't here to rescue her. Through the suite door, now unlocked and left slightly ajar in the sudden scramble, she heard Dante's voice, sharp and commanding, cutting through the alarm. "Luca, lower perimeter grid C. Engage countermeasures Alpha 7. They're bypassing the thermal and attempting a layered approach." She edged out of her suite, peering down the hallway towards the main living area. Luca was a blur of motion at a sleek, interactive wall display, fingers flying across interfaces Victoria recognized as high-level security protocols. Dante stood beside him, jaw tight, eyes scanning smaller monitors that showed schematic diagrams of the building, highlighted points flashing red. He wore dark tactical gear over his usual clothes, a sidearm holstered at his hip, a stark contrast to the tailored suits she'd seen him in. Sector Delta reporting attempted breach at the service elevator access point on level 78. Luca barked, his voice strained. Simultaneous network intrusion attempt detected, sophisticated polymorphic code. A chill went down Victoria's spine. A cyber attack asterisk and a physical one. That level of coordination and technical skill wasn't typical for street-level muscle. This was a direct, calculated assault by a well-resourced rival family targeting Dante's sanctuary, and they knew enough about his security systems to combine methods. The sound of grinding metal echoed faintly from somewhere far below, followed seconds later by a muffled asterisk thump that shook the floor subtly. Dante flinched, but his expression remained ruthlessly focused. "Damn it," he muttered. "They're hitting blind spots we just created reinforcing against the rappel." He jabbed a finger at the display. "Route internal defenses to 78 Luca, prioritize network countermeasures, seal off non-essential systems, isolate the intrusion." Victoria hugged herself, watching the frantic activity. She was less than 50 feet from them, close enough to feel the raw tension radiating from Dante, the controlled panic in Luca's movements. The penthouse wasn't just a prison, it was now a battlefield. Her gaze flickered to the main entry, the one Luca usually kept locked. It was sealed tight, reinforced doors a solid barrier against the chaos. But the vulnerability was clear. They weren't untouchable. The enemy had reached the base of the tower, infiltrated the network, and were attempting to claw their way upwards, directly to them. The gilded cage was under siege. After what felt like an eternity but was likely only minutes, the alarms began to subside, replaced by the low hum of systems resetting and the faint, distant sounds of conflict contained within the building's lower levels. Luca wiped sweat from his brow. "Breach repelled," he reported, voice ragged. "Service elevator access point neutralized. Internal security handled level 78. Network intrusion contained and purged. They didn't make it past secondary protocols." It was. "Too close." Dante nodded, his shoulders slumping fractionally before straightening again. "Too close," he agreed, his eyes narrowed, scanning the data feeds on the screens. They knew where to hit. How? He spun around, heading away from the security hub, presumably to assess damage or review logs. As he passed the corridor where Victoria stood frozen, his gaze swept over her, sharp and assessing, before he moved on. He didn't acknowledge her fear, her presence, just another variable in the equation of his survival. Dante disappeared around a corner, heading towards what Victoria knew was his private study and command center. Luca remained by the security monitors, running diagnostics and coordinating with personnel in the building. Victoria, no longer paralyzed by the immediate threat, felt a strange urge to follow Dante. Was it concern? Or the morbid curiosity of a scientist observing a dangerous specimen under duress? She cautiously moved down the hall. The air still crackled with the aftershock of the attempted infiltration. Smoke, faint but acrid, drifted from a vent overhead, likely from overloaded systems or minor detonations further down. She reached the door to Dante's study, usually a formidable barrier, but now standing slightly ajar, just like her sweet door had been. A sign of the hurried chaos. She pushed it open silently. The study was a mess, not from physical damage inside, but from Dante himself. Papers were scattered, monitors displayed flashing error messages, and the air was thick with tension. Dante was standing by a large window overlooking another section of the city, his back to her. He had shed the tactical vest, but his movements were stiff, unnatural. "Luca," he rasped, his voice tight with pain. Victoria hesitated, then stepped fully into the room. It's Victoria." Dante turned slowly. His face was pale, strained. He was clutching his left arm just above the elbow, dark fluid seeping between his fingers and staining the tactical shirt sleeve. Shrapnel? A ricochet? He must have been closer to the point of impact than Luca, perhaps checking external defenses himself via internal cameras or comms at the moment of the breach attempt. "Cross," he said, his voice flat, acknowledging her presence as an inconvenience. Get out. You're bleeding, she stated, stating the obvious with the detached calm of someone used to technical problems, not physical ones. But seeing his pain, his unnatural stillness bypassed some of her fear. This wasn't the untouchable monster, this was a man who was hurt. It's a graze, he snarled, but his grip on his arm tightened and he swayed slightly. I said, get out. Victoria ignored him. Her hacker's mind, trained to assess systems and vulnerabilities, now assessed him. Pale face, rapid, shallow breaths, protective stance over the wound. Not just a graze, possibly deeper than he let on or hitting something vital like an artery or nerve cluster. You need to elevate it, she said, moving towards him cautiously. And stop the bleeding. Do you have a first aid kit? He stared at her, his eyes narrowed, distrust warring with something she couldn't quite read, perhaps pain, perhaps reluctant necessity. Luca is handling everything else, he said through gritted teeth. And you need help now, she countered, her voice gaining a surprising firmness. Before you bleed out on your expensive rug. He let out a harsh, short breath that might have been a laugh or a grunt of pain. Don't be ridiculous. Am I? She challenged, taking another step closer. Let me see it. His body language was resistant, coiled, even injured. It went against every instinct in his being to show weakness, especially to his captive. But Luca was genuinely tied up dealing with the aftermath of the attack, securing the perimeter, coordinating with the building's security forces, analyzing the attack vectors. Dante was, for this brief moment, without his usual resources, and Victoria was right there. Slowly, reluctantly, he loosened his grip just enough for her to see the wound. It wasn't large, but the ragged edges suggested shrapnel, and it was bleeding steadily. Too much for a simple graze. Okay, Victoria said, her voice calm, practical. It's not arterial, thankfully, but it needs to be cleaned and pressure applied. She looked around the messy study. First aid kit, where? He gestured curtly with his uninjured hand towards a hidden panel in the wall. Behind the panel, code 47 Alpha 9. Victoria went to the panel, entered the code he'd given her, and it slid open, revealing a compact but fully stocked medical kit. She grabbed it and returned to him. Sit down, she instructed, indicating a chair. Again, he hesitated, a flicker of pride in his eyes, but the pain was evident. He sank into the chair heavily, his movements stiff. Victoria knelt beside him, carefully cutting away the fabric around the wound with small surgical scissors from the kit. The forced proximity was electric. She could smell the faint scent of ozone from the attack, the sterile tang of the medical supplies, and the deeper, musky scent of Dante himself. His warmth radiated against her arm as she worked. She tried to keep her focus purely on the task, the technical problem of fixing damaged tissue, ignoring the terrifying power of the man beneath her hands. She cleaned the wound with antiseptic wipes, causing him to wince and clench his jaw. He watched her face, his expression unreadable. You're not squeamish, he observed, his voice a low murmur. I deal with complex systems under pressure, she replied, not looking up. Broken code, damaged hardware. This is just biological hardware. She found sterile gauze and began applying pressure. Hold this, she instructed, pressing a thick pad into his hand and guiding it onto the wound. His fingers, strong and scarred, closed over hers for a brief second before taking over. His touch, even through the gauze, was unsettlingly familiar, a dangerous spark in the midst of a crisis. It's going to need stitches eventually, she said, standing up. But this will stop the bleeding for now. He nodded, his eyes still fixed on her. The vulnerability was fleeting, masked quickly by his usual intensity. But for a few minutes, the impenetrable monster had been just a man bleeding, dependent on the variable he held captive. Returning to the main living area after helping Dante, Victoria found the immediate crisis had passed. Luca was methodically checking security feeds and speaking in hushed tones on an encrypted comm. The alarms were silent. The penthouse felt like a wound stitched shut, the danger contained but the scar evident. As Luca turned away to take another call in a different part of the room, Victoria saw it. A service panel near a reinforced door, one that led to a seldom-used stairwell, usually secured by multiple electronic locks, was slightly ajar. Likely left open by a technician or security sweep during the post-attack chaos, or perhaps briefly disabled by a power surge from the repelled intrusion. It was a tiny flaw in the system, a crack in the gilded cage. Her breath hitched. Escape. The word resonated in her mind like a siren song. It was a fleeting opportunity, measured in seconds, maybe a minute before someone noticed and sealed it. She could slip through, make her way down the stairwell, find a way out of the building at a lower level amidst the city's ongoing chaos. Her heart pounded with a desperate, primal urge. Freedom. The open air. A chance, however slim, to disappear back into the anonymity of the Obsidian City, to run, to hide, to reclaim her life. But the logical, cold part of her brain, the part that analyzed systems and calculated risks, kicked in instantly. Outside, she pictured the city below, the one she'd watched burn for days. A war zone. Fires, sirens, checkpoints, rival syndicate forces clashing in the streets. If she somehow made it out of the building, where would she go? Every major transit hub would be watched. The Thorns would be hunting the walking security breach who had caused all this, especially now that rivals had tried to snatch her. The Mortys, having just failed to infiltrate Dante's fortress, would be even more desperate to get their hands on her, either to exploit her knowledge or eliminate her as a loose end. Running meant being alone in a city crawling with killers who wanted her dead or captured for their own ruthless purposes. Dante was a monster, a captor, but he was her monster. He was the Thorn family's lead enforcer, surrounded by layers of security, resources, and armed personnel. He was Silas Thorn's right hand, a shield against the upper echelons of the syndicate who wanted her gone. If she stayed, she was still a prisoner, yes. But she was a valuable asset, protected by the full, brutal force of the Thorn family's most effective operative. Her survival, however conditional, was tied directly to his. Out there she was prey. Here she was caged but guarded. The thought was chilling, a pragmatic horror that settled deep in her gut, choosing captivity, choosing the monster who had ruined her life over the terrifying uncertainty of freedom. She looked at the narrow gap in the service panel, the promise of escape beckoning like a mirage. Then she looked back at Dante, still in his study, nursing his wound. And Luca, vigilant, professional, the embodiment of the security that surrounded her. With a conscious, deliberate effort, Victoria turned her back on the panel. She walked away towards the windows, towards the view of the warring city, a silent acknowledgement of her terrifying choice. She was staying. The Obsidian City outside was too dangerous. Her best, perhaps only, chance of survival lay within the dark heart of the beast's lair, protected by the very man who held her captive. Trust the darkness. It was the only rational path left. Later that day, as the city continued to simmer, Dante received the call. Victoria was in the main living area, ostensibly reading, but acutely aware of Dante's movements and the tension that never truly left the penthouse. He took the call in his study, the door now closed, but the communication was holographic, and faint whispers of the conversation sometimes bled through the reinforced glass walls. Victoria didn't need to hear every word. Silas Thorn's presence, even as a flickering projection, filled the room with cold authority. His voice, though low, carried the weight of absolute power and simmering impatience. Failed attempt, Dante? Silas's voice was a low growl. Reports indicate they reached the 78th floor. Your location is supposed to be impenetrable. Dante's response was measured, precise. Victoria imagined him standing rigid, holding his injured arm perhaps, refusing to show weakness even to his superior. Protocols engaged immediately, Silas. The penetration was contained, casualties minimal on our side. They used a combined vector, unexpected sophistication. We are reviewing logs now to trace the origin. Review logs, Silas scoffed, the holographic image of his face hardening. While Morty dogs scratch at your door? This chaos continues because of the labyrinth breach. Because of her asterisk. The projection seemed to flicker with distaste. She is the vulnerability, Dante. I gave you 24 hours. That was yesterday. You were to handle it. Permanently. A beat of silence stretched, taut as a wire. Victoria's blood ran cold. The ultimatum. The looming threat not just from outside, but from within the very structure that housed her. Her analysis of their network intrusion methods was invaluable in repelling this morning's attack. Dante's voice came back, clearer this time. She recognized patterns my own teams missed in the initial chaos. there is strategic value in keeping her, contained, for now, as an analytical resource. A resource? Silas's holographic eyes narrowed. You are wasting time, Dante, and resources. Every hour she breathes is a risk. To the family, to you asterisk. The Mortys want her. Others will too. She is a lightning rod for trouble. I want proof she is gone. By sunrise tomorrow, Dante, no more delays, deliver the corpse or I will send someone who won't hesitate. The chilling finality of Silas's tone was unmistakable. He wasn't just impatient, he was issuing a direct threat. Dante had until dawn to resolve the Victoria problem or face the consequences from his own boss. The internal clock was ticking down, faster and more urgently than ever before. The holographic projection of Silas Thorne vanished, leaving only the tense silence of the study. Victoria stared at the closed door, her heart pounding a desperate rhythm against her ribs. She was a ticking time bomb, and Silas Thorne was holding the fuse, pushing Dante to cut the wire. The war outside seemed to hold its breath after Silas's call. The immediate post-attack tension eased, replaced by a heavy, watchful quiet. Victoria sat by the window as darkness fell again, the city lights glittering below like scattered jewels on black velvet, a deceptively beautiful facade over the simmering violence. Dante finally emerged from his study hours later. He moved stiffly, favoring his injured arm, which was now bound tightly beneath his shirt. He looked exhausted, lines etched around his eyes, but his gaze was as sharp and restless as ever. He walked past her without a word, then stopped, turning back. He stood a few feet away, silhouetted against the city lights, an imposing, unreadable figure. The tension between them was a palpable third entity in the room, a complex web woven from captivity, defiance, shared crisis, and the strange, dark thread of attraction that neither seemed able to entirely sever. Silas gave me until dawn, he stated, his voice low, devoid of inflection. Victoria swallowed, nodding. She had heard enough to understand the weight of that deadline. He sees you as a liability, Dante continued, an unacceptable risk. And you, she asked, her voice quiet, what do you see? He was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on her, searching, evaluating. A variable, he finally said, repeating the term he'd used weeks ago, but it felt different now. Less clinical, more complicated. A problem I haven't solved yet. A problem with a deadline, she pointed out, the irony not lost on her. He let out a soft, humorless sound. Everything in this life has a deadline, Cross. The trick is not letting someone else set it for you. She shifted, hugging her knees to her chest. The near-death experience of the morning, the raw threat from Silas, her own chilling choice to stay, it had stripped away layers. She wasn't just terrified anymore, she was calculating, adapting. Why didn't you just kill me from the start? She asked, the question hanging in the air. It would have been easier, for you, for Silas. None of this. War would have happened. Easier isn't always optimal, he replied, his gaze drifting back to the city. You breach the labyrinth, something supposedly impossible. You have a mind that works in ways mine does not. You are unique. He paused, then added, almost reluctantly, and I don't eliminate pieces from the board until I understand their full potential. Or until his hand is forced, she thought, like Silas forcing it now. You know he's going to send someone, she said, stating the cold truth. If you don't, comply. Dante turned back to her, his expression darkening. Then I won't comply. The simple statement held the weight of everything he was: ruthless, defiant, protective of his domain, his control. It was a declaration of war not just against the Mortys, but against the very structure that had elevated him, if they threatened what he deemed his asterisk. But you can't fight everyone, she whispered. Silas, his reach is absolute. My reach is just further, he said, a dangerous glint in his eyes. He took a step closer, stopping just before he was within arm's reach. You chose to stay today, Cross. I saw you near the service panel. You had a window. You didn't take it. Her breath hitched. He knew. Of course, he knew. He saw everything. The city is a slaughterhouse, she said, her voice barely audible. Running would have been suicide. Pragmatic, he said, a flicker of something akin to approval in his gaze. You understand the calculus. He reached out, his fingers brushing her cheek, his touch sending a shiver down her spine, not entirely from fear this time. It was a strange, dangerous connection, forged in fire and fear. You made your choice, he said, his voice low, resonant in the quiet room. You are mine, and I protect what is mine. He leaned closer, his face inches from hers. Against the Mortys, against Sela's, against anyone who thinks they can take you from me. Just as the final wave of that storm was gathering to crash upon the Skyfall penthouse, the silence that had fallen between them, heavy with the weight of shared shadow and silent vows, was suddenly shattered. It wasn't a physical sound at first, but a chilling shift in the air, a low thrum that vibrated through the structure of the building itself, escalating into a frantic, electronic scream as alarms tore through the penthouse's opulent quiet. Lights flickered erratically, security screens exploded with flashing alerts, and the distant wail of sirens became a rapidly approaching crescendo, no longer mere city noise, but the grim heralds of war arriving at their doorstep. Victoria felt the floor tremble beneath her feet, the carefully constructed illusion of safety dissolving around them. Her world, already confined to these luxurious walls, was about to be ripped apart by the very forces she had been hiding from. The fortress was under siege, transforming instantly from a gilded prison into a battlefield, and the only way out was through the heart of the chaos, bound irrevocably to the man who was both her captor and, inexplicably, her desperate, last hope for survival. Chapter 8: The Siege. The crescendo Victoria felt building wasn't just sound, it was the physical tearing of the Skyfall penthouse's defenses. Alarms didn't just ring, they shrieked asterisk, vibrating through the structure, through her very bones, a frantic electronic panic that mirrored the city's approaching war cries. Security screens flickered wildly, displaying breach alerts flashing red across every system, transforming the luxurious quiet into a canvas of digital terror. The final wave of that storm had arrived, shattering the fragile stillness and turning their gilded cage instantly into the heart of a brutal battlefield. Through the sheer sonic assault, Victoria saw Dante and Luca already moving, their expressions grim masks of grim determination as the initial reports flooded in. Simultaneous breaches at multiple points, perimeter compromised. The fortress wasn't holding, the enemy was at the gates, and soon they would be inside these very walls, bringing the war directly to them. The control room, usually a silent hub of glowing displays, pulsed with frantic energy. Dante stood before the wall of screens, a communist pressed to his ear, his voice a low, lethal rumble cutting through the electronic cacophony. Luca was beside him, fingers flying across a console, rerouting power, sealing zones that were already being penetrated. Perimeter breach Alpha 7 confirmed, a voice crackled from the comms. Heavy ordnance used, automated defenses failing. Reroute turrets to Beta 9, Dante snapped, his eyes scanning the feeds, processing the onslaught. Delta 2 is under fire. Containment teams reporting hostiles entering the central core elevators. Victoria watched from the doorway where Luca had steered her moments before the storm broke, urging her toward what he considered the safest zone, the reinforced communications core, ironically. Now, even this sanctuary felt flimsy. The penthouse wasn't just being attacked, it was being dismantled from the outside in. The feeds showed forces scaling the sheer glass walls using magnetic climbers, others rappelling from hijacked air vehicles, and the most terrifying breach, direct assaults on lower service levels leading to core infrastructure. They hit the main power conduit on level 98, Luca announced, his voice tight. Backup generator engaged, but the lower security grid is offline. They know the structure, Dante said, a grim certainty in his tone. Mortys pulled the trigger. Full scale, he slammed a hand onto a console. Pull all available assets to levels 99 and 100. Contain the breach at the public access elevators. Do not let them consolidate inside. The sleek, modern architecture of the Skyfall penthouse, designed for panoramic views and effortless luxury, was its weakness now. Too much glass, too many access points designed for convenience, now avenues for destruction. The alarms shifted pitch, a different, more urgent wail. Internal sensors tripped, Luca said, eyes wide. Level 99, breach detected in the West Wing service corridor. The enemy wasn't just outside anymore, they were asterisk in asterisk. A distant explosion rocked the floor beneath Victoria's feet. It was followed quickly by another, closer. The lights flickered violently, then steadied, dimmer now. The controlled chaos of the security hub gave way to the visceral reality of invasion. Luca grabbed her arm, pulling her back from the doorway. "Stay here," he ordered, his face grim. "Under no circumstances do you leave this room unless ordered." But Dante was already moving, grabbing a heavy automatic rifle from a wall mount. "Luca, secure the core. I'll take point on the corridor breach." "Dante, wait, the numbers," Luca protested. "No time," Dante growled, checking the weapon's action. He looked at Victoria for a split second, his eyes hard, unreadable, before he turned and strode out, melting into the muted corridors of the penthouse. Luca locked the core room door from the inside, leaving Victoria effectively sealed in. Panic clawed at her throat. The shriek of alarms was a constant, maddening backdrop to the growing sounds of violence. She heard heavy bootfalls rushing past in the corridor outside, followed by sharp, metallic clangs, the sounds of weapons being readied, doors being forced. Then the first close gunfire erupted. Bang, 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 it was deafeningly loud in the confined space of the penthouse. Not the distant pop of street crime, but the brutal, concussive report of combat weapons fired indoors. It sounded like it was just outside the reinforced door. Shouts in a language she didn't understand, thick with aggression, mixed with the sharp commands of Thorne's security personnel. She pressed herself against the wall furthest from the door, heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The luxurious, minimalist decor suddenly seemed grotesque. A priceless abstract painting hung crookedly on the wall. A sleek, uncomfortable designer chair sat askew. This perfect, sterile environment was being shredded by the raw, ugly reality of war. More gunfire, closer now, interspersed with the sickening sound of bodies hitting the floor. A guttural cry of pain, cut short. The scent of cordite, sharp and acrid, began to seep under the door, burning her nostrils. She squeezed her eyes shut for a moment, the image of the city from the windows flashing in her mind. The people below, unaware of the battle raging hundreds of feet above their heads. This was the price of exposing the hidden world, the consequence of her intellectual curiosity. She was trapped in the heart of the storm she had unleashed. Footsteps pounded past again, faster, more urgent. Shouting, the sound of something heavy being dragged. Then silence. A thick, unnerving silence, broken only by the distant wail of alarms and the thrum of the emergency power. Had it stopped? Was it over? The fear was a tangible weight in her stomach. She wanted to curl into a ball to disappear. But the hacker's mind, the problem solver, refused to shut down completely. She cataloged the sounds, the silences, the direction of the fighting, the types of weapons. Small, useless observations in the face of overwhelming terror, but it was her way of processing, of maintaining some semblance of control in a world that had stolen it all. The silence shattered again, this time with a different sound. A heavy asterisk thud against the corridor wall outside the core room, followed by a pained grunt. Then, Dante's voice, strained, barking orders. "Luca." "Open the damn door?" Victoria heard Luca fumbling with the lock. The heavy door hissed open, revealing a scene of brutal carnage. The corridor was wrecked. One wall was sprayed with blood and littered with shell casings. The abstract painting was shredded, its canvas torn by bullets. Two bodies lay slumped against the wall, Morty enforcers by their dark tactical gear. And Dante stood over them, breathing heavily, his rifle held ready. There was a dark stain spreading on his shoulder where he'd been injured earlier. "Clear," he rasped to Luca, who emerged, handgun drawn. They tried a pincer move. "Luca, get her out of here. Now." He looked at Victoria, his face smeared with dirt and sweat, a raw, almost wild look in his eyes that she hadn't seen before. It wasn't just the cold, calculating killer. There was something else there, urgency, protection. "Where?" Luca asked, glancing around the torn-up corridor. "Kitchen service stairs," Dante ordered. "Level 98. It's locked down but should be clear of hostiles for now asterisk. Stay low, I'm sweeping the main level." Another burst of gunfire erupted from deeper within the penthouse. Dante flinched slightly at the sound, his eyes flicking towards it, but his focus immediately snapped back to Victoria. "Go!" he yelled, his voice laced with an urgency that went beyond simply securing an asset. He wasn't pushing her away, he was pushing her asterisk to safety. He took a step towards her, then seemed to reconsider, motioning fiercely to Luca. Move her, Luca. Stay behind cover. As Luca grabbed her arm, pulling her gently but firmly out of the core room, Victoria saw Dante raise his rifle again, his stance shifting back into lethal efficiency as he prepared to re-engage. Even in the chaos, covered in blood and sweat, facing an overwhelming assault, he was deliberately ensuring her asterisk path was clear, directing Luca to get her specifically out of the immediate line of fire. It wasn't about securing the penthouse, it was about securing her asterisk. The realization hit Victoria with the force of a physical blow. He was protecting her, not just using her. It was a terrifying, confusing, undeniable shift in their dynamic. Luca pulled her down the wrecked corridor, moving fast but trying to keep them low. They passed more carnage, the brutal reality of the fight laid bare. Splintered wood from blasted doors, streaks of blood on the pristine floor, the metallic tang in the air growing stronger. Victoria stumbled once, catching herself on a wall that had been gouged by bullet impacts. Her mind raced, cataloging the path Luca was taking, noting structural damage, potential routes, just as she had in her suite. It was a survival mechanism, an involuntary analysis of her environment. They reached a heavy service door labeled Kitchen Access/L98. Luca swiped a keycard, and the lock cycled with a heavy thud. Inside, he instructed, pushing the door open just enough for her to slip through before following and relocking it. They were in a narrow, utilitarian stairwell, a stark contrast to the penthouse above. Concrete walls, steel steps. It smelled of grease and cleaning supplies, a mundane scent in the middle of a nightmare. "Stay here," Luca said again, his own face grim. "I need to support Dante. This stairwell is secondary access, less likely they'll push this way immediately." "Wait," Victoria said, her voice trembling but driven by the analytical urgency that had taken over her fear. Her eyes scanned the stairwell walls, taking in the details. She remembered a panel she'd seen during her brief, supervised moments outside her suite, something about the building's internal network infrastructure. Luca paused, his hand on the door handle, ready to leave her. The sounds of fighting echoed faintly even here, muted by the concrete, but a constant reminder of the war above. "What is it?" Luca asked, his patience thin. "The network," Victoria said, her mind racing. "The penthouse network. I saw a maintenance panel. Near the service elevator junction on level 99. It had access to the local subnet, for environmental controls, security cameras." Luca stared at her, uncomprehending. "What about it?" "They've compromised the lower security grid," Victoria explained quickly, the words tumbling out as she connected the dots from Dante's earlier commands and her own observations. "But the penthouse-level systems might be isolated. If I can access that panel, I might be able to see their asterisk internal movements once they're inside. Reroute surveillance feeds, create a blind spot, maybe even lock down corridors remotely if the system is robust enough and still on the backup power." Luca's eyes narrowed, weighing her words. He knew her value wasn't in combat, but in her mind. And Dante had just risked himself protecting that mind. "You think you can do that?" he asked. "I don't know," Victoria admitted honestly. "It depends on the system architecture, how isolated it is, what protocols are running. But it's a chance. Better than just hiding here doing nothing." A loud crash from above galvanized them. The fighting was intensifying, spreading. Luca made a swift decision. "Okay, the panel is just down the corridor from where we came. It's risky. You'll have maybe 5 minutes. I'll cover the corridor entrance." He opened the stairwell door just a crack, peering out. The path back looked clear for the moment, though the sounds of battle were closer again. "Stay low," Luca warned her. "If I give the signal, you come immediately. Understand?" Victoria nodded, her throat dry. Fear was still a cold knot in her stomach, but it was now edged with a sharp, terrifying focus. This wasn't just about hiding anymore. This was about using the very skills that had gotten her into this mess to try and survive it. She was an active participant, not just a terrified observer. Taking a deep breath that tasted of dust and fear, Victoria slipped out of the stairwell and back into the war-torn corridor. The adrenaline spiked, sharp and clean. She moved fast, low to the ground, using the wrecked furniture and torn walls for cover. The air was thick with the smell of burnt electronics and something metallic she didn't want to identify. Every sound was amplified, her own ragged breathing, the distant shouts, the intermittent bursts of gunfire. She found the panel where she remembered it being a discrete metal rectangle set flush into the wall near a junction box. Wires snaked into it. It looked untouched by the direct fighting, a small island of potential in the chaos. Working quickly, her fingers fumbling slightly with urgency, she located the access port she'd noted. It was an older service port, perhaps overlooked in the system updates. She had no tools, but remembered seeing a thin, sturdy piece of shattered glass near a broken display panel down the corridor. She darted back, retrieved it, her hands shaking, and used it to carefully pry open the port's cover. Inside, a tangle of wires and circuit boards. She needed data access. Locating the diagnostic terminal required finesse, touch memory from years spent working with hardware. Using the glass shard again, she delicately bridged two contacts on the board, a risky maneuver but one that sometimes forced a diagnostic handshake on older systems. A small, internal light flickered on the panel. It was responding. Now the real work began. She needed to interface, to inject a simple command string without being detected by system security protocols, if any were still active on this isolated segment. Her fingers, stained with dust and a little blood from the sharp glass, danced across the exposed wires, creating a makeshift data connection with terrifying speed and precision. It was crude, dangerous, but it was her only shot. She closed her eyes for a second, focusing, visualizing the network architecture she'd glimpsed on Dante's screens. Environmental controls, camera feeds, where would an attacker focus? Security systems, comms arrays. If she could access the asterisk camera network, she could see them coming. If she could feed false data, create loop feeds, as her fingers worked, the sounds of fighting escalated dramatically. A fierce exchange erupted very close by. Shouts, the distinctive heavier thud of a shotgun blast, the higher crackle of assault rifles. It sounded like Dante and Luca were heavily engaged, possibly pinned down. Time was running out. She completed the circuit bridge, forcing the diagnostic terminal to boot up. A tiny, almost invisible LED on the panel turned green. Success. Crude access achieved. Now to navigate blind. She couldn't see the interface, she had to feel it, remember the pinouts and signals. Adrenaline surged, sharpening her focus to an almost painful degree. Ignoring the terror, ignoring the screams from down the corridor, she began to feel her way through the network using the raw data stream she'd forced open. It was like hacking in the dark, relying purely on instinct and years of muscle memory. She needed to find the camera feeds. Where would they be routed? Through the main security server? No, that was likely compromised or shut down. The environmental control subnet often carried redundant feeds for monitoring. She probed that path. Got it. A flood of data, raw and unfiltered, poured into her senses. It was like opening a fire hose of visual information. She could see feeds, flickering, damaged, but they're asterisk. The main corridor, the elevator lobby. Feeds from external cameras showing more attackers scaling the building. And one feed, showing Dante and Luca, backed into a corner near the main elevators, exchanging fire with a large group of Morty enforcers who were systematically advancing, using the penthouse's own architectural features for cover. They were outnumbered, pinned down. The Morty leader wasn't visible yet, but this force was too large, too organized to be a mere vanguard. They were pushing hard, overwhelming the defense. Victoria saw Dante take a hit, staggering back against the wall, but still firing, still fighting. Luca was covering him, laying down suppressing fire. They wouldn't last long like this. She had the camera feeds. What could she do? Reroute, yes, but that wouldn't stop them. Create a diversion, an idea, reckless and terrifying, flashed in her mind. Environmental controls, smoke detectors, emergency systems. What if she triggered a localized, asterisk massive system alert? Not an alarm, but something that would disorient, create confusion, buy them seconds. Smoke, the ventilation system. If she could force the vents in that specific corridor asterisk to pull air asterisk out, creating a sudden, localized vacuum effect, while simultaneously triggering the emergency smoke evacuation system to flood the area. It was insane. It could backfire, blind Dante and Luca too. but the feed showed they were about to be overrun. Her fingers moved, bypassing protocols, injecting commands directly into the system core she had accessed. Focus. Speed. She had seen enough schematics on Dante's screens to have a rough map in her head. Force the ventilation cycle. Trigger the emergency system. Now, on the camera feed, she saw the impossible happen. Wisps of white began to pour from the vents in the corridor where Dante and Luca were fighting. Not fire smoke, but something thick and disorienting, coupled with a sudden, strange atmospheric pressure change that seemed to momentarily stagger the advancing Morty attackers. Confusion. Hesitation. Seconds bought. She saw Dante look up, momentarily bewildered, then his eyes narrowed as he seemed to understand, or at least recognize the opportunity. "Move!" he roared to Luca, using the momentary confusion and disorientation to push forward, changing their position, seizing the initiative. Victoria pulled her fingers away from the panel, the tiny green LED winking out as the connection severed. Her lungs burned, her hands trembled violently. She'd done it. Something. She didn't know if it would work if it had helped enough, but she had used her skills, not to escape, but to aid her captors in the fight for their lives. Suddenly, the sounds of fighting down the corridor seemed to shift, becoming more focused, less desperate. Had she helped turn the tide? The sounds of the assault intensified, shifting from the dispersed chaos of the breach to a concentrated, relentless surge. They were coming. Not just through the secondary routes Victoria had observed, but everywhere, a focused storm intent on reaching its objective. Her brief, desperate action had only been a tremor before the avalanche, cementing her place not just as a prisoner, but as an active, terrifyingly vulnerable participant in this deadly, penthouse war, caught directly in the path of the converging storm. The relentless push wasn't just aimed at isolating pockets of resistance, it was driving towards the heart of the fortress, towards Dante Romano himself. The tactical skirmishes, the bypassed defenses, the brief disruptions Victoria had witnessed, they were all preamble. The true reckoning, the inevitable brutal collision that would decide the fate of the siege, the penthouse, and everyone trapped within its walls, was no longer a looming threat. It was here, crashing down upon them, and Victoria was standing directly at the precipice of the final storm. Chapter 9. Reckoning. The converging storm Victoria had felt closing in was no longer a distant threat. It was the thunder of boots and the sharp crackle of gunfire erupting just around the corner, driving relentlessly through the war-torn corridors towards the penthouse's core. Caught near the service passage she'd used, the sounds hammered against the thin metal, confirming she was directly in the path of the final, brutal push. This wasn't about isolated skirmishes anymore. It was the concentrated surge, the unstoppable wave crashing down upon Dante Romano, intent on reaching its objective. The brief diversion she'd created had only delayed the inevitable. Now, the true reckoning was here, pulling her into its violent heart whether she was ready or not. The sounds intensified, the tearing shriek of reinforced metal giving way, the guttural shouts of men closing in, punctuated by the rhythmic, deadly percussion of automatic fire. They weren't far now, pushing through the last remaining defenses towards Dante's inner sanctum. Victoria, huddled just inside the entry to the service corridor Luca had pulled her into, could hear the frantic, shouted exchanges between Dante and Luca in the main hallway beyond. "They're breaching level 100 security doors, multiple points," Luca yelled, his voice strained, raw with exertion. "Morty himself, Dante, he's with them." A cold knot tightened in Victoria's gut. Marco Morty, the man who wanted her dead to destabilize the Thorns, the man leading this bloody assault. Dante's voice was a low, deadly growl that cut through the din. "They'll pay for every inch. Luca, keep them focused on this approach." "We hold the hall." Victoria risked a quick peek around the service corridor's frame. The main hall of the penthouse, once a showcase of stark, minimalist luxury, was a wreckage. Marble was shattered, art was torn and riddled with bullet holes, and the panoramic windows framing the city below were cracked and scarred, splintering the early morning light into jagged shards. Bodies lay sprawled on the floor, a grim mosaic of Thorn and Morty soldiers. Dante stood braced behind an overturned, heavy console, Luca at his side. Both were bloodied, their movements sharp with desperate energy. The air was thick with the metallic tang of blood and the acrid smell of burnt powder and ozone. Through the gaping maw of a security door that had been brutally forced open down the hall, she could see the vanguard of the final assault. Leading them was a hulking man, a stark contrast to Dante's lean, predatory grace. Marco Morti. Even from here, Victoria recognized the ruthless focus in his eyes, the sheer brute force of his presence as he drove his men forward. He was flanked by fighters whose movements were precise, relentless, clearly his most seasoned enforcers. This wasn't just an attack, it was a personal invasion, Marco Morti coming to claim Dante's domain, and with it, the anomaly within it. The fighting escalated rapidly. Morti's men poured into the hall, using the debris for cover. Dante and Luca returned fire, their movements economical and deadly, but they were outnumbered, pushed back inch by bloody inch. The raw violence of the scene was terrifying, a stark, horrifying ballet of death unfolding before her eyes. Victoria pressed herself back into the service corridor, heart hammering against her ribs, the sounds of the brutal, close-quarters battle engulfing her. She was trapped, a terrified observer, but the plan required her to be more. She had to find a way to act. The desperate sounds of the battle just outside the service corridor intensified. Victoria could hear grunts of pain, the sickening thud of bodies, Dante barking orders that were almost lost in the chaos. They were losing ground. She had to do something, now. Her mind raced, discarding options as quickly as they formed. Direct combat was impossible. Escape was impossible. Her only weapon was her mind, her knowledge. She thought back to the service panel she'd used earlier, the connection she'd forced to the penthouse network. It had given her access, brief and precarious, but access nonetheless. Could she still tap into something? But what? Disrupting systems again might not be enough against this concentrated push. They were too close, too focused. She needed something that gave Dante a definitive advantage, something Marco Morti wouldn't expect. Then, a memory, sharp and vivid, surfaced from the chaotic jumble of data she had glimpsed in the labyrinth during her initial, fateful hack. Financial ledgers, personnel records, strategic plans, and architectural schematics. Not just for the Apex Tower, but for key Thorn assets across the city, including detailed blueprints for this penthouse. She had skimmed them, looking for security weaknesses, entry points. One detail flared in her mind, a structural note, an old utility passage long sealed off in the main penthouse blueprints, but still present in the deeper architectural files. She'd seen a vestige from an earlier design phase near the central service core. It wasn't a standard access point, more of a reinforced conduit space, forgotten, potentially hidden behind a decorative panel near where Dante and Luca were making their last stand. A weakness not in the security asterisk, but in the physical structure itself, exploitable from the right angle. But how to communicate it? Yelling would be useless in the gunfire. She needed to reach Dante directly, give him this specific, critical piece of information right now. Her eyes darted around the cramped service corridor. Her hands, trembling but steady with adrenaline, went to the small shard of glass she'd kept from forcing the service panel open earlier. There. Another panel, identical to the first, embedded low in the wall just a few feet away. It wouldn't give her full network access, not without more time and tools, but maybe she could force a minimal, localized connection. Enough to push a message. Working frantically, fingers clumsy with urgency, she pried the edge of the panel, scraping at the seal with the glass. It groaned, resisting, but then yielded with a snap. A tangle of wires and fiber optics lay behind it. She needed a direct line, a physical link to something Dante could access or respond to. Outside, the sounds of the fight were desperate now. Shouts, Dante's voice strained. "Luca, fall back, I'll cover." No time. Victoria spotted a thick, armored data cable. Not standard Ethernet, something proprietary, likely linked directly to Dante's secure comms system nearby. Risky, foolish, but her only chance. With trembling hands, she used the glass shard to strip the outer sheathing, exposing the delicate inner fibers. She needed to bridge a connection, bypass authentication, force a signal. It was a desperate, almost impossible maneuver, requiring pinpoint precision under unimaginable stress. As she worked, the panel exposed, She saw Luca pushed back hard against the service corridor's entrance frame, blood running down his face. Marco Morty was closing in on Dante, forcing him into a corner near a large, damaged structural support column. This was it. Last chance. Victoria ripped a tiny piece of her sleeve, dampened it with water from a ruptured pipe overhead. Using the damp cloth and the glass shard, she manipulated the exposed fibers, attempting to create a physical tap into the cable. It was a blind hack, relying purely on instinct and her deep understanding of network architecture, bypassing all protocols. Sparks flew, her fingers protested against the makeshift tools. Then a flicker. A tiny, unstable signal indicator lit up on the panel's internal diagnostics. It was connected. Unstable, fragile but connected, she didn't have a keyboard, no interface. Her mind worked furiously. How to transmit information this specific way? Data pulses. Morse code, maybe? No, too slow, too obvious if intercepted. A burst signal. A single, focused data packet. If she could just inject one asterisk command string, encoded with the information, into the system's buffer where Dante's comms were drawing data, focusing every ounce of her will, picturing the blueprints, the location of that sealed passage near the column. She began to tap, manipulating the exposed fibers in a complex sequence of touches, a physical language of binary code, injecting the data directly into the live cable. It was like sending a thought directly into the network. Location, structural weakness, column level 100 old passage, use explosive charge flank. It was a frantic, almost insane process, sending raw data, hoping Dante's systems or he himself could interpret it. She didn't know if it worked. She felt a jolt of feedback, a flash of heat from the exposed wires. The signal indicator died. The connection was broken. But just outside the service corridor, amidst the roaring chaos, she heard it. Dante's voice, sharp, clear, cutting through the gunfire. "Luca, flank right, explosive charge on that asterisk column. Now." He'd gotten the message. He'd understood. Marco Morty was just moments away from engaging Dante in hand-to-hand combat when Luca, moving with desperate speed, planted a small, shaped charge against the specified column, a structural support, yes, but also concealing the entrance to that old, forgotten passage. The resulting detonation wasn't large enough to compromise the building's integrity, but it was precisely targeted. It blew a section of the wall and the decorative panel outward, revealing the narrow, dark opening of the sealed passage, and more critically, disorienting Marco Morty and his immediate guards caught in the blast radius and the sudden flood of dust and debris. It was the opening Dante needed. The sudden, localized blast threw the fight into chaos. Disoriented, coughing in the dust, Marco Morty was vulnerable. Dante didn't hesitate. Moving with a speed that belied his earlier injuries, he surged forward, using the diversion Victoria had created. He didn't reach for a gun. This was too close, too personal. What followed was a brutal, visceral confrontation. Victoria, still near the service panel, could only glimpse flashes through the settling dust, a flurry of impossibly fast movements, the glint of steel, the sounds of bone connecting with bone, sharp grunts of pain, Dante's focused rage unleashed. Luca, recovering quickly, engaged Morty's stunned guards, preventing them from reinforcing their leader. The fight between Dante and Marco was short, savage, and decisive. Dante, though smaller, fought with a ruthless technical precision that outmatched Marco's brute force. There was a final, desperate cry of pain, a heavy thud. Then, silence. The gunfire stopped. The shouts died away. The only sounds were distant sirens still wailing through the city and the ragged breathing of the survivors. Victoria pushed herself fully out of the service corridor. The hall was a scene of utter devastation. More bodies littered the ground, a final, bloody toll. The air was thick with smoke and dust, catching in the broken shards of light. Marco Morty lay still near the ruptured column, defeated. His remaining guards, seeing their leader fall, were quickly subdued or fled, scattering into the damaged penthouse levels below, their assault broken. Dante stood over Morty, his chest heaving, face grim and streaked with dirt and blood. He held a bloodied knife, but his eyes weren't on the fallen leader. They scanned the hall, finding Luca, who gave a weary nod, confirming their survival. Then Dante's gaze locked onto Victoria. For a long moment, he just looked at her, standing amidst the carnage, smudged with dust, eyes wide and disbelieving. In his eyes, Victoria saw a flicker of something raw, something that cut through the ruthless mask, relief, stark and undeniable. He didn't speak immediately. His gaze traveled from her face to the damaged service panel behind her, then back to the blasted column near where Marco lay. He understood. He knew what she had done. Slowly, deliberately, Dante straightened up. "Luca," he said, his voice rough, "secure the perimeter, sweep the remaining levels, ensure there are no stragglers, and handle our guest." He gestured towards Marco Morti's body with the tip of his knife. Luca nodded, his expression unreadable. "Right, Dante." He moved away, gathering his remaining men, beginning the grim task of cleanup and securing the victory. Dante took a step towards Victoria. The silence in the hall was deafening, broken only by the distant sounds of the city and the ragged beat of her own heart. He didn't close the distance immediately. He simply stood there, a figure of brutal power and surprising vulnerability in the ruined space, his gaze unwavering. His earlier injuries seemed forgotten, replaced by the sheer exhaustion and adrenaline crash settling in. He reached out a hand, not in threat, but offering. "Come," he said, his voice softer now, stripped bare by the violence. "It's over for now." Victoria hesitated for only a second. The city outside was still a war zone, Morty's forces rooted but not destroyed, Thorne's power structure intact but shaken, and Silas's deadline had passed. But here, in the heart of the beast's lair, with Dante Romano standing before her, she was paradoxically safer than she could ever be alone. She had made her choice hours ago in the service corridor. She took a step towards him, accepting the silent, dangerous truth of her situation. Dante led Victoria away from the devastation of the main hall, navigating through less damaged sections of the penthouse. The opulence was still visible, but now marred by the recent battle, overturned furniture, scattered debris, the lingering smell of blood and smoke. He didn't take her back to her suite. Instead, he guided her to a quiet, relatively untouched area near a still intact window overlooking the bruised, pre-dawn skyline. The city was quiet now, the immediate storm past, leaving behind a tense, fragile calm. He sank onto a low, sleek sofa, exhaustion finally catching up to him. He gestured for her to sit nearby, but didn't force it. Victoria remained standing for a moment, her gaze flicking from the damaged view to the man who had been her captor, her protector, and whose life she had just helped save. He looked different. The cold, controlled mask was gone, replaced by a raw weariness that aged him years. His shirt was torn, stained with blood that wasn't all his. He ran a hand over his face, scrubbing at the dirt and blood, his eyes closed for a brief second. "Marco Morty," he said, the name heavy in the silence. "He's gone." Victoria nodded, swallowing. The reality of it felt distant, unreal. I saw." He opened his eyes, meeting her gaze. There was a depth there she hadn't seen before. "You knew," he stated, not a question. "That passage from the labyrinth files." "Yes," she admitted, her voice quiet. "I saw the old schematics when I was exploring." A faint, grim smile touched his lips. "Exploring." "Always exploring, aren't you, Victoria?" He paused. "You saved my life and Luca's, that information. It was critical, we didn't know about it." Victoria hugged herself, feeling the chill of the damaged room. I saw you pushed back, and I remembered. It was the only thing I could think of." She hesitated, then the words spilled out, raw and honest. Why did you? Protect me? Why didn't you just follow orders?" He looked away, towards the city, the new dawn staining the sky with bruised purples and reds. "Silas's orders," he murmured, as if tasting the name. "Because you weren't a variable to eliminate anymore, not just an asset." His gaze returned to her, intense, searching. "You were the anomaly who got inside my head as much as my systems. You defied me, challenged me. And when we needed you," he trailed off, searching for the words, a struggle she found almost more unsettling than his usual ruthless certainty. "You needed my skills," Victoria finished, trying to ground the moment in pragmatism, but it felt hollow. "More than that," Dante said, his voice low, rough. "When I saw Marco pushing in, when it was down to the wire, all I thought about was keeping you out of his hands, keeping you safe. Everything else, the family, the orders, it faded." He reached out, his hand hovering in the space between them, bloodied knuckles visible. "You belong to me," he'd said, claiming her, owning her. But in that moment, running towards the fight while securing her safety, he had done something else entirely. He had prioritized her. He had asterisk protected her, not just contained her. Victoria looked at his outstretched hand, then at his face, vulnerable in a way she had never seen. The man who held her captive, who embodied the brutal control of this world, had just put his life on the line to save hers, after she had already defied him and accidentally triggered a war. And she had put herself in the line of fire to save him. Following Ed irrevocably in the heat of battle, she didn't take his hand. Not yet, but she didn't back away either. She met his gaze, the silence stretching between them, weighted with the cost of the night and the uncertain, terrifying reality of what they had become to each other. The siege was over. The penthouse was secured, battered but held. But the consequences of their survival and Dante's defiance of Sela's thorn were yet to come crashing down upon them. The fragile quiet in the ruined penthouse was a temporary reprieve, not peace. Dawn was breaking over the Obsidian city, but it brought no absolution, only the harsh light revealing the price they had paid and the even steeper one they were about to be charged. The physical siege had ended, yes, but the true reckoning had not even begun. It waited, not out in the bullet-scarred streets, but high above, in the silent, sterile corridors of Apex Tower. Sela's thorn knew. He knew Victoria Cross was alive, knew Dante had chosen her survival over his explicit command, knew his authority had been challenged. The deadline had passed. Now came the cost for surviving the bullets, a price that would be exacted not in blood and shattered glass, but in control, consequence, and the chilling reality of their new, undeniable place at the heart of his unforgiving empire. Chapter 10: The Aftermath and the Cost. The silence that followed the gunfire was heavy not with peace, but with the lingering echo of the true reckoning waiting above them. As the harsh dawn light spilled across the devastation, revealing bullet scars on every surface and the grim tableau of the Skyfall penthouse's ruin, Dante moved among his weary men, already assessing the cost in blood and shattered glass. Victoria watched from the periphery, the acrid tang of dust and cordite a constant reminder that while the physical siege had ended, the price they paid for surviving it was only just beginning to be tallied. The Skyfall penthouse was a wreck. The sleek, minimalist luxury that had defined Victoria's gilded cage was marred by violence. Bullet holes pockmarked walls, furniture was overturned or shredded, and the floor in certain areas was stained crimson, now drying to a dark, rusty brown. Bodies had been removed or covered, but the grim evidence of the brutal assault remained everywhere. Dante, despite his injuries, moved with an unsettling calm. His shoulder was bandaged, Victoria's hasty work holding for now, and there was a grim set to his jaw, but his focus was absolute. He spoke in clipped, efficient tones to Luca and the handful of surviving security personnel, assessing the damage, counting losses, and directing the immediate cleanup and reinforcement efforts. Luca, his face etched with exhaustion and smeared with grime, delivered updates in hushed, reverent tones. "Morty's dead," Luca reported, his voice rough. "Confirmed, his main force, crippled, heavy losses across the city for them. Apex held thanks to you." He glanced at Victoria, a flicker of something unreadable respect, resentment, in his eyes before it vanished. "Intel suggests what's left is scattered, broken. No immediate threat." Dante nodded slowly, his gaze sweeping across the ruined room, then out the panoramic windows at the city below, now bathed in the stark, unforgiving light of morning. Smoke still curled from distant districts, faint echoes of the night's war. "A costly victory," he murmured, more to himself than to Luca. "The price is paid in blood and exposure." Victoria stood back, near the entrance to the less damaged private quarters, her arms wrapped around herself. The cold reality of the violence, the casual discussion of death and broken forces, settled deep in her bones. She had caused this. Her hack had opened the labyrinth, revealed the weakness, provided the spark. Men had died because she couldn't resist an intellectual challenge. Children might be orphaned, families ruined, because of a code. The grim reality of her role was stark, undeniable. She watched Dante, this man who had been her captor, then her unlikely protector, then a partner in survival against the onslaught. He was still dangerous, still ruthless, but seeing him survey the wreckage, assessing the human cost alongside the structural, hinted at layers she hadn't seen before. Or perhaps, she thought numbly, she was just seeing what she needed to see to survive this. Luca continued, detailing security breaches, network damage, and the need for immediate, deep scans to ensure no Morty code or listening devices had been left behind. "We're vulnerable until we patch the firewalls and secure the physical perimeter downstairs," he finished. "The Apex Tower needs to be notified officially." Dante nodded. "Prepare the report for Silas. Minimal details. State the penthouse was attacked, defense was successful, Morty is neutralized. Mention my injuries. Do not mention Victoria's involvement. Not yet." Luca hesitated, his gaze flicking towards Victoria again. "Silas knows about the breach, Dante. He knows she was here. After the last communication—" "I know what he knows," Dante cut him off, his voice steel. "This is about managing the narrative now. Go, secure this level first. Get the cleaners in discreetly." As Luca and the remaining security personnel began the grim task of clearing the debris and tending to the wounded, Victoria remained frozen in place. Dante's gaze met hers across the wrecked room. There was no longer just the detached analysis, the chilling possessiveness, or the fleeting moments of shared tension. There was something else, a weariness, a shared burden, and a connection forged in the fire of the siege. Hours later, the main living area was partially restored, the most gruesome evidence of the battle removed, though the scars remained etched into the walls and floor. Dante sat in a temporary command chair, a secure holographic comms unit activated before him. Luca stood silently at his side. Victoria was present too, though placed further back, technically out of view of the main holographic projection, but close enough to see and hear. Dante hadn't ordered her away. Her presence, whether for monitoring or some unspoken acknowledgement of her role, was permitted. The holographic projection shimmered, resolving into the stern, imposing figure of Silas Thorne. Silas's face was a mask of cold control, but his eyes held a sharp, assessing glint. He was in his office at the Apex Tower, the pristine, undamaged backdrop a stark contrast to Dante's environment. "Dante," Silas's voice was smooth, devoid of warmth. "The reports reached me, conflicting accounts. Your penthouse was attacked." "Affirmative," Dante replied, his tone level, professional. "A targeted, well-planned assault. Morty himself led it." Silas leaned forward slightly. "Morty is dead. Your defense was effective, impressive given the scale, and your current condition?" He noted Dante's bandaged shoulder. "Minor injury," Dante dismissed. "The penthouse sustained structural damage, but security remains intact. Casualties among my men were significant, but the attackers were repelled." "Repelled," Silas repeated, his voice hardening. "After they breached your outer defenses, after they reached level 99, after they came within meters of you." His gaze seemed to pierce through the hologram, demanding absolute truth. "And the asset, the one who breached the labyrinth?" Dante met his gaze without flinching. "The asset is secure, contained." A beat of silence stretched, thick with unspoken tension. Victoria felt a tremor run through her. This was it. Silas knew she was alive. "She was the target, Dante," Silas stated, his voice dangerously low. "The vulnerability, her survival meant Morty knew where to hit you. Her existence was the trigger." "Her breach was the trigger," Dante corrected, subtle but firm. "The war was coming, Silas. She merely provided the catalyst. And her insight proved valuable during the assault. My security team struggled with the attacker's encryption. She facilitated decryption." He chose his words carefully, minimizing her autonomy, emphasizing her utility to him. Silas's expression didn't soften, but a flicker of consideration appeared in his eyes. "Valuable? A liability who drew a full-scale assault to your doorstep is valuable? Knowing her methods, her perspective. It allows us to harden our own systems against future breaches," Dante argued, leaning into the narrative of long-term security strategy. "Eliminating her gains us nothing now but loose ends. Containing her, studying her? That yields intelligence. Intelligence we clearly need." Victoria held her breath. This was her fate being debated, her life measured not in worth but in strategic value. Asset, liability, intelligence. Silas was silent for a long moment, evaluating, calculating. Dante's defiance regarding her death earlier had cost him. But his successful defense, the elimination of Morty, had bought him leverage. "Very well, Dante," Silas finally said, the decision made. "She is now your responsibility. Entirely. She is no longer merely an asset to be contained, she is your asset, your vulnerability. Her continued existence reflects directly on your competence, your loyalty. Any future issues, any exposure, any attempt by her to escape or communicate. The consequences will fall solely on you and they will be severe." The message was clear. Victoria was now irrevocably tied to Dante. Her fate was his burden. Her status was that of Dante's property, a dangerous tool he had claimed and must now absolutely control. She wasn't free, she was just formally assigned to a different leash, one held directly by a man whose standing with the family was now inextricably linked to her compliance and silence. "Understood, Silas," Dante replied, his voice calm, accepting the heavy mandate. Silas nodded, a cold finality in the gesture. "Secure your location. Assess the damage. The war with Morty may be decided, but other challenges remain. You have proven your worth, Dante. Do not compromise it by failing to manage your asset." The hologram flickered and vanished, leaving behind only the hum of the unit and the silence in the scarred room. Victoria looked at Dante. His face was a mask of grim determination, but she saw the tension in his shoulders, the subtle clench of his jaw. He had saved her life, yes. But he had also sealed her fate, binding her permanently to his world, to him. Later that day, after the immediate security protocols had been implemented and a semblance of order restored, Victoria found Dante in a less damaged section of the penthouse. He was looking out at the city, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and orange, a grim beauty reflected in the glass. "Silas," Victoria began, her voice quiet, testing the waters. Dante turned, his expression unreadable. He made his position clear. "And mine?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Now that it's over, with Morty." Dante walked towards her slowly, stopping just a few feet away. The air between them was thick with unspoken consequences, with the weight of shared trauma and their volatile bond. "It's not over, Victoria. The immediate threat is neutralized. But the war is a constant state in this city, and your position. It's changed." "Changed how?" she pressed, a flicker of desperate hope battling the crushing certainty in her gut. Can I leave, go back, now that I'm no longer a secret, no longer just a potential liability?" Dante's gaze was direct, unwavering, and utterly devoid of the answer she longed for. "Go back to what? Your apartment is gone. Your identity compromised. The hack wasn't just detected, it exposed a key vulnerability. You are known now. By the remnants of Morty's crew who blame you. By factions within the Thorn family who view you as a risk. And most importantly," his voice dropped, becoming intensely personal, "you are known to Silas. He knows you exist, he knows you breached the labyrinth, and he knows I prioritized your survival. He has made you my responsibility, my asset to control." He reached out, not to touch her threateningly, but to gesture towards the city outside. "Out there," he said, his voice low, "you are prey. Unprotected, unconnected. You'd be hunted. Not just by rivals, but by those who see you as a loose end tied to my failure to eliminate you when ordered. Your survival, it hangs on your connection to me now. It's the only shield you have in this city." Victoria flinched internally, not from fear, but from the chilling truth of his words. She was a known entity in a hidden war. Her technical skills, which had once been her freedom, were now her chains. She couldn't disappear. She couldn't go back to her old life. That life was gone, destroyed the moment Dante Romano walked through her door. "So," she said, her voice flat, "I'm still a prisoner." "You are mine," Dante stated, the possessiveness back in his tone, but layered with something else, a grim finality, perhaps even a reluctant acceptance of the burden. "Not a traditional prisoner, perhaps, but bound. To this place, to me. Your world collided with mine, Victoria. You survived that collision because of me. Now your survival is inextricably linked to your position here. As my associate, my charge, my liability, call it what you will, but you cannot leave, not without risking death. Yours and mine." The brutal honesty left her breathless. Her freedom wasn't simply denied, it was obsolete. Her old life, her independence were relics. She had survived the siege, but the cost was the very autonomy she valued. She was bound to him, not by chains, but by the deadly web of the syndicate world she had stumbled into. Her bond with him was her only protection, and that bond was her cage. The dynamic hadn't just changed, it had solidified into a terrifying, unbreakable interdependence. The hours that followed were strangely quiet. The penthouse remained a place of damage and ongoing repair, but the immediate, frantic tension of the siege was gone, replaced by a heavy, somber atmosphere. Victoria found herself observing Dante, trying to reconcile the ruthless enforcer with the man who had defied his boss to protect her, who now carried the weight of her existence on his shoulders. He wasn't the same. The icy detachment that had defined him in the early days of her captivity was fractured. He was still guarded, still dangerous, but there were moments, a lingering look, a subtle gesture, the way he spoke her name that hinted at a shift. His control was still absolute, yet it was now tinged with a possessiveness that felt less like claiming property, and more like fiercely guarding something he couldn't afford to lose, even if he wasn't sure what it was. He owned her body, yes, her physical presence, her confinement here. But she had undeniably touched his soul, cracking the carefully constructed facade of the unfeeling weapon. She had become a variable he couldn't control, a vulnerability he now had to protect, changing the very essence of his ruthless efficiency. And Victoria, she looked at her reflection in a damaged pane of glass. Her eyes were different, harder, sharper, filled with a weary knowledge of the darkness in the world and the darkness within herself. She had helped him kill men. She had accepted her continued captivity as the more pragmatic choice. Her independence hadn't been destroyed, it had been redefined. She was no longer trying to escape Asterisk from Dante, but learning to survive Asterisk with Asterisk him, navigating the treacherous landscape of their shared existence. Had her heart survived intact, she wasn't sure. It felt different, hardened, scarred. The innocent curiosity that had led her into the labyrinth felt like a distant memory. The cost of her survival, of this strange, dangerous connection, was her own transformation. She had become a part of his world, and that world left its mark. There was a moment, late in the evening, when they were alone in a relatively quiet corner of the penthouse. Dante was looking over holographic schematics for reinforcing the building's network security. Victoria approached him, drawn by a pull she couldn't deny, a strange mix of fear, resentment, and something disturbingly akin to understanding. "You defied Silas," she said, stating the obvious truth that hung between them. "For me." Dante looked up, his gaze intense. "It was pragmatic." "No," she challenged softly. "It wasn't, not entirely. You could have eliminated me, smoothed things over. It would have been the pragmatic choice for you asterisk for your standing." He didn't answer directly, his eyes searching hers. The silence stretched, filled with the unspoken acknowledgement of the profound shift in their dynamic. He hadn't just kept her alive, he had chosen her over a direct order from the head of the family, gambling his own safety and status. That wasn't just pragmatism, it was a choice driven by something he couldn't name, something she had awakened within him. He reached out, his hand slowly rising, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. It wasn't a rough touch, not a commanding one. It was tentative, almost hesitant. "You are unexpected, Victoria." His voice was low, rough. "You broke my system. You broke something else, too." She leaned into the touch just slightly, a terrifying, instinctual response. Her body remembered his touch, the dangerous heat, the unwanted connection. It owned her in a way she couldn't fight. And his admission, his vulnerability, revealed that she owned a part of him too, a part he clearly hadn't wanted to surrender. The cost was paid in both their transformations, his loss of cold detachment, her loss of naive innocence. They were two scarred individuals, bound together by fate, necessity, and a dangerous, undeniable current that ran between them. Days passed. The Skyfall penthouse was being meticulously repaired, the scars of the siege slowly being plastered over and painted. New, even more stringent security measures were being implemented. Life inside the gilded cage resumed, but it was a different life. Victoria was still confined, still unable to leave, but the nature of her captivity had changed. She was no longer just a prisoner awaiting judgment, she was a fixture, a factor in Dante's world. She had access to technology now, albeit heavily monitored and firewalled. She used it not for escape attempts, but for understanding, analyzing, finding her place in this strange, dangerous reality. She saw reports of the aftermath across the city, the fracturing of the Morty family, the subtle shifts in power, the increased vigilance of the Thorne family. She was an expert witness to the ripples her actions had caused. Dante spent less time away, his focus fixed on consolidating his position after the attack and managing the scrutiny from Silas. He and Victoria shared meals, conversations about technology, about the city, about the mechanics of power. The forced intimacy of captivity had evolved into a complex codependence. They relied on each other, he on her unique mind, and now, perhaps, her unexpected presence. She on his protection in a world that would devour her without it. One evening, they stood together by the main panoramic window, the glass now gleaming, reflecting the dazzling, terrifying sprawl of the Obsidian city. It was a constant reminder of the world they were both trapped within, the world where their fates were now intertwined. The penthouse stood tall, a symbol of Dante's power and Victoria's confinement, scarred but enduring. "The city," Victoria said, looking out at the endless lights, the dark canyons between skyscrapers. "It just keeps going, doesn't it, no matter what happens up here?" "It endures," Dante replied, his voice quiet. "It always does. Power shifts, names change, but the structures remain, and we are a part of that now." He didn't say, "You are a part of that now," or "I am a part of that now." He said, "we." It was a simple word, but it carried the weight of everything that had passed between them, everything they had survived. They were bound. Captor and captive, protector and protected, two anomalies linked by a hack and a war. Her body belonged to his control, confined within his walls. His soul, or what was left of it, was undeniably touched, changed, held by her defiance, her intellect, her sheer refusal to break. They had survived the siege, but their future remained uncertain, precarious. They were together in the gilded cage, watching the Obsidian city below, facing whatever challenges the dark, unforgiving world would throw at them next, bound by a bond that was both their salvation and their new, permanent prison. The cost had been paid, and now the aftermath was simply living with it,